Hi, everyone. Um, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, so I apologize to all those people who've heard all this before, but I think we have a few new faces, so I will go through the routine. So what is the interspecies internet? Well, I'm sure if you asked each of us, you're going to get a very different answer, but it's a meeting place for minds. It's also a meeting place for dreams. We are a motley collection of scientists, philosophers, data scientists, artists, and animal lovers. We started off as a dozen or so, but after two conferences, we're now nearly 4,000 participants, many of whom have been exploring intra and interspecies communications and connections independently, but have chosen to come together to form a loose but passionate group of explorers and enthusiasts. These are some of the things we've been thinking about. One, explore all the possibilities of interspecies communication. Two, to encourage the design and creation of new, better, and more intuitive interfaces. Three, look at all the clues and patterns in non-human communication that might suggest foundations of language, and especially now using the power of AI and machine learning. The work of the Earth Species Project is well worth checking out. We've also got to acknowledge, protect, publicize the remarkable work of all the pioneers in this field, and that we're going to do with the Hall of Fame. Another idea is to gather all the relevant data in one place and build a powerful and open archive. And thanks very much to Mark Graham for that. We'd love this to be an open science project, open meaning open and accessible to all, but also meaning open to ideas, regardless of how much they might conflict with current expert thought. True, there is a basic anthropomorphic tendency. We want other species to think and communicate like us, but do little dream of talking to the animals. But we know they communicate in very different ways to us, sometimes with different senses and frequency ranges. Translation is not going to be an easy task. But it's also clear that we've been blind to the obvious clues that non-humans have given us, and that we might have grossly underestimated their cognitive and communicative abilities. We really want the IS to serve this community from below and not to be another top-down institution. We've already had heated debates about if and whether any level of suffering is acceptable in the research projects we associate with. Please let us know what you feel about this and any other issues that you think we ought to be looking at. We also want to support all the work being done here, but apart from Jeremy Coller's amazing support, including his $1 million prize, we are a new organization with very limited resources. So please don't think of us as a bank giving grants, but more like the phone company helping to connect you and hopefully having a very cool tool store in development. Oliver Sacks, who through his books introduced me to so many fascinating ideas and facts, was working on a book on this very subject when we sadly lost him. But there's an extract of an encounter with an orangutan in the Toronto Zoo. Her bright little eyes flicked about, observing my nose, my chin, all the human but also apish features of my face, identifying me as one of her own, or at least closely akin. Then she stared into my eyes and I into hers, like lovers gazing into each other's eyes, with just the pane of glass between us. I put my left hand against the window and she immediately put her right hand over mine. Their affinity was obvious. We could both see how similar they were. I found this astounding, wonderful, and it gave me an intense feeling of kinship and closeness as I'd never had before with any animal. So our agenda is to explore that kinship that we know and love so well with our pets, to explore and expand all the related science so we learn how to facilitate much better communication between all species, and to reconnect with and learn to respect the magnificent world of nature. So the world that we leave behind is not a sick, selfish, and dying place, but a healthy, thriving, and respectful home for all our kids and grandkids and all the sentient beings that are our fellow passengers on spaceship Earth. Today would not be possible, and this project would not be possible without the internet. And it gives me great pleasure to be able to bring on next one of the creators of the internet, known as the godfather of the internet, Mr. Vince Cerf.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. Welcome, everyone. And note to self, never follow Peter Gabriel, because he is just so intensely wonderful. Well, my role in all this is mostly infrastructure. Internet has connected some 4 billion people around the world. We have another 4 billion to go. But we would like very much to use that same infrastructure to allow non-human species to communicate. What's powerful about the internet is that it's not just a networking capability for communication, but it links powerful computing resources together. And it's my view, I hope shared by many of you and my colleagues, that the computing power of the internet may be a way of facilitating communication between human and non-human species, or even between two non-human species, non-identical non-human species. The idea here is that we may be able to transduce the information and signals that we get from one species into something that's understandable to another. But in order to do that, we need to support an enormous amount of intraspecies communication research, a good deal of which we will hear about today. So I see my role as a tool builder and a helper in this whole process, hoping that the work of the internet will support the deep research that others of you are doing. Speaking of which, our next speaker and board member is Diana Rice, who is very much involved for many, almost, well, should I say decades, Diana? And maybe not. A long time, understanding non-human species communication, dolphins included. So Diana, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Vint. Yeah, well, I have to follow Peter and Vint, so good luck to me. Anyway, first of all, thank you. And I just would like to welcome all of you back, to those of you who've been with us for our past 2 meetings, as well as welcoming some new faces that we welcome to the community. I'm showing these images of other species because they're part of this conversation. Unfortunately, they're not joining us today on this call, but really they have inspired all of us to be in this forum. And as Peter said, most of us are here because we're either interested in decoding the signals, the communication of other animals, getting a better understanding of how they use their signals, be they acoustic, behavioral combinations of signals, but really trying to understand the myriad of different signals and communication on this planet. How are they communicating intra-specifically with their own conspecifics? Many of us are also interested in developing and extending previous work that's been done on interspecies communication between us and other animals, and also finding ways of providing other animals with more choice and control. Last spring, we started a new monthly lecture series. It's our online conversations lecture series, and we're going to be continuing it again this fall and spring. We were delighted to have William Lin, a thought leader in animal and sustainability ethics, kick off the series. As Peter mentioned, we're deeply interested in ethics and how we interact with other animals on this planet. Bill Lin is a research scientist with the George Perkins Marsh Institute at Clark University. He gave a wonderful and inspiring primer on ethics. Our second lecture was given by Ofer Chernikovsky. Oops, I'm going to just stop this. Was given by Ofer Chernikovsky at Hunter College, and he gave us also an exciting lecture on birdsong development in zebra finches and presented new findings on the dynamics and types of imitation that he's finding in zebrafinch. This was a paper recently published in Nature Communications. Both talks are now posted on our website, and again, we'll be announcing future talks. If any of you are interested in giving a lecture, we welcome you to do it. And please contact Will Davis, the CEO of the Interspecies Internet, who's been connecting with you up to now. Another of our interspecies initiatives that Peter already mentioned is the Hall of Fame. We want to recognize and honor the accomplishments of scientists who've done pioneering work in the field of in these fields we've talked about, in decoding or creating interactive interfaces for interspecies communication. We want to honor, though, their non-human collaborators. And again, I was showing you pictures of many of those collaborators because they're equally important. So we're really excited to create this Hall of Fame and doing portraits of both the humans and the non-human and their non-human partners. Notably, we have Nobel laureate photographer Peter Badge doing the photographs. So we're really delighted with this. We've been a little delayed in getting this kicked off due to the pandemic, but we'll hopefully be able to really start taking these photographs and developing this in the near future. We hope that this effort will serve both to honor past and present explorers, many of you obviously included, and also serve to stimulate future generations with this quest. We see this effort as increasing worldwide and greater respect and empathy for animals, and that we hope that that's one of the important contributions that this forum and our efforts, our collective efforts, will make. So again, we are looking forward to next year's meeting already. Hopefully we can do it in person, but if not, we'll certainly be doing another one, even if it has to be online. And now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Jeremy Collar, who Peter already mentioned. For those of you, though, who don't know Jeremy, he's the CEO and chairman of Collar Capital and the founder of the Jeremy Collar Foundation. Jeremy's one of our biggest supporters. So Jeremy, it's all yours.
That's very kind, Diana. Thank you. And can I just congratulate you for saying other animals, recognizing that we are one. Peter, note. You know, it's been actually, this is our third conference, and it's been huge progress has been made. And I'd like to continue our thoughts from last year's Interspecies Conversations, where, you know, I continue to be inspired by Dr. Dolittle. I believe the world will be a much better and kinder place if we could have a conversation with a crying cow in a factory farm and ask how she feels when her calf is taken away from her. But how are we going to do that? And an analogy we keep coming back to is that of the Rosetta Stone and how it unlocked the hieroglyphic secrets of ancient Egypt. A vision for what we're striving for is to seek out the conversation algorithm that will unlock in ourselves a greater sense of respect, echoing, you know, what all of us have been saying and all us feel, that those respect for those other animals with whom we share our planet. So we no longer see them simply as objects and possessions. So one of the focuses of these gatherings is to bring together the best minds in the field as a call to action and ask how we as a community can work together. So what are the next steps and how can we help each other? I think we can support the community while also encouraging a new generation. And my words are particularly focused on those of you minded to take up this challenge, to bridge the gap in our knowledge. Now's the moment to harness the advances in the internet and particularly in artificial intelligence, which gives us at last the opportunity of unlocking the conversation algorithm that will enable us to speak to our fellow animals. We can ask ourselves a very simple question. Under what conditions can human inspiration and perspiration break through the barrier to unlock a universal translator? Peter Gabriel was the genesis for Interspecies Internet. Everyone here has been brought together by their vision to bring the interspecies internet to life. Today, we're at the intersection of two revolutions, artificial intelligence and biotechnology. This could lead to a world where AI, robots, will actively work and live and coexist amongst us. Not too hard to imagine, easier than aliens. This could be a world where AI and robots, will work with us, be with us, comfort us. They've already developed the ability to speak with themselves in a way we humans can't understand. So what happens when they develop the ability to speak with other animals? This isn't science fiction. If I was to make a prediction, I predict this is within our grasp and going to happen within 5 years only. Robots capable of making their own decisions will be part of our society. And what happens when there are a voice for the voiceless? What will the pigs, the chickens, the cows, and the salmon say about us humans to these robots? Who will be defined as the virus and the pest on the planet? We all know the answer. I'm getting a lot of text. We all know the answer. This one is a chilling prediction of a potential future. Set against that background, the interspecies internet highlighted the need for this wonderful community to ensure its data and research doesn't become extinct. Which is why the Jeremy Collier Foundation has given the first interspecies internet grant to Ocean Alliance to digitize Roger Payne's historic recordings that discovered whale song. Particularly for young scientists to carry on the analysis with new AI technology, metaphorically enabling them to stand on the shoulders of the scientists who've gone before, creating a combined sense of purpose and shared ambition that we might build within our society, respect, and hopefully greater compassion between ourselves and other animals. And now I'd like to hand you over to Neil to talk some science.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy. It's been a pleasure to help this project's plumbing infrastructure. Like Vint, our contribution has been down in the trenches since Peter first approached us for how to realize this. Following what was essentially an accidental TED Talk, this series began just as a one-off meeting at MIT and has grown into this wonderful collaborating community of thousands of people, finding many of them had been working in isolation and the power of coming together. And so today is a working day. It's not a day for just mutual admiration. The goal isn't what you can do individually, but what this community can do together. So it's organized as lightning talks to tour topics, curated conversations, and then ending, most importantly, with discussion of next steps. And so the day is interactive. Post chats to the comment, we'll be processing them. If you want to talk, raise a hand. We'll try to call on as many as people. When you're not talking, please mute. As Peter noted, this is recorded but private. Tomorrow's event will be public. And then to help with follow-up, I'd like to thank the note takers, Anne Castiglione and Lily Voisenet. And I'd like to particularly thank the production team making it possible, Fran and Norella, and Will for everything he's done to make this possible. And so with that, this afternoon, I'll talk more about the plumbing. It's a pleasure to hand off to Mark Gran, director of the Wayback Machine at the Internet Archive. In the end, everything this project does turns into data, which we had been remiss in managing, and Mark is bringing order to our data. Mark?
Order, that is a tall order. So thanks. I'm super happy to be here today. And, I was lucky enough to participate or attend actually in the conference at MIT a couple of years ago. And I saw some old friends like Britt and Asa from Earth Species there. And then I saw a lot of people that are friends now. And it really sparked my imagination. And as Neil noted, I manage the Wayback Machine at the Internet Archive. Very briefly, we're a 25-year-old memory institution. We're planning for our next 25 years now. In addition to archiving much of the web, we also archive video and audio and microfilm and microfiche and a whole range of other media. So it was natural that I thought, oh, what could a memory institution help bring to this effort here? And so at our last workshop, we announced that we initiate a web-based conversation space. And we chose Slack. Slack is now used by many of you, I'm sure, in other parts of your life. It was purchased last year by Salesforce. It's a super easy to use platform that facilitates conversation. And the response was pretty much overwhelming. Within a few hours, we had 100 people sign up from across the participants to this workspace. And now there are more than 300 people that are participating in the Slack workspace for the Interspecies Internet project. I'm going to speak more about that at a conversation later this morning and get into more of the specifics about other communications and information sharing and resource sharing efforts that we have underway, and very much look forward to your feedback and discussion about how we can do better. That's really the goal here, is how can we improve on what we've done and build on what we've done and help strengthen our community. But this morning, what I'd like to do is preview a new effort. The community is defined by the participants, the people, the projects, the history, all of the prior work expressed through books and papers and recordings and all of the rest of the things that make up the body of effort over the decades of interspecies communications. And so I think it's time that we do a comprehensive landscape analysis, that we attempt to do an inventory of the resources in the field so that we can help see ourselves as part of a larger effort. So much work has already been done, but we're about to take it to another level. Over the next few days, you should expect to get an email or other mode of invitation to fill out a Google form asking you to help us fill in some of the blanks. Our intention is to share, to gather this information, to organize it, and as everything that we do, make it available to everyone in the community, certainly through the website interspecies.io and in other ways. And so, as always, your suggestions, requests, your critiques, and encouragement are welcomed and appreciated because that's what's going to help make this effort a success. So that's it. I was the last in this amazing lineup that I had to follow. So thank you very much.
So, Mark, thank you so much. And you're making such a huge difference to this entire effort. It's just been wonderful working with you. So we're actually ahead of time, we're great. We have lots of extra time, so we can move and have more discussion. We're going to go into our next section, which are going to be the lightning talks. And today we have 4 lightning talks. Each talk is 10 minutes long. It's going to be followed by a 5-minute Q&A for that speaker. And then later, after all 4 speakers talk, we'll be having a longer panel Q&A where all 4 people who've spoken will be on a panel, and then you can ask more questions. Now, if you want to ask a question, please either post it in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll try to take as many questions as possible. So I want to give a brief introduction to all 4 speakers. Everybody should have their full bios. And just for time's sake, I'll just be brief on the introductions, and then we'll go into having the 4 speakers with less of an introduction. So today, our first talk is going to be about Project Seti. Decoding the Language of Whales. And that's going to be given by a pair of speakers, two speakers, David Gruber, who's the Presidential Professor of Biology and Environmental Science at Baruch College. It's part of the City University of New York. And David serves on the faculty also of the PhD program in biology at the CUNY Graduate Center. And he's also with the CUNY Macaulay Honors College. And the other speaker on this talk is Pratyusha Sharma, who is a PhD student in the Electrical Engineering and Computer Science Department at MIT. Our second talk, Arachnophilia, Spiders and Spiderwebs, is a collaborative work from a team of scientists, artists, and musicians. Again, as many of you know, we have these really exciting interdisciplinary approaches that many of you are already involved in. Well, this is a wonderful example. And Marcus Buehler, who's the McAfee Professor of Engineering at MIT and a composer of experimental, classical, and electronic music, explores the use of sonification, creating new forms of musical expression derived from both biological materials and living systems to convey information and perceptualize data in a way that's quite different from what many of us are used to. This talk will also be given in conjunction with his colleagues, Tomás Sacrosino, who's an Argentine artist who's very interested also in translating this work into activities that protect animals, that raise public awareness about conservation and welfare. And composer, conductor, and clarinetist, Evan Saporin. The third talk, Ear to the Ground, Seismic Information for Wildlife Conservation and Deciphering Enigmatic Animal Communication Models, will be presented by Tarje Nissen-Meyer, who's a geophysicist at the Department of Earth Sciences at the University of Oxford. His work focuses on wave phenomenon and he uses seismic vibrations for wildlife conservation and decoding animal communication. Another excellent example for this translational research. And our fourth speaker is Claire Spottiswoode, an evolutionary biologist from the University of Cambridge and the University of Cape Town. Claire will be telling us about her research and observations on a unique form of interspecies communication in her talk, Interspecies Communication Between Humans and Wild Birds in Africa. So we're ready to start. So I'd love to introduce now David and Pratyusha.
Thank you, Diana. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here and to be in this community. And I really love that you're creating a sense of community of people that want to connect to ourselves and to connect to other animals. So I just want to take a minute to introduce Pratyusha and to introduce Project Seti. So we are a 2020 TED Audacious project that is comprehensively looking at the communication of sperm whales. And we'll be doing this off of the coast of Dominica. And just to give a little background of how we're doing it, this will entail bringing together robotics, data visualization, data processing, machine learning, as well as linguistics, and coming together. It's taking 1.5 years for us to install and develop our core whale listening station, which will be 3 large buoys that will eventually create a pipeline of data that we will share with the community. So over the next year, we'll be developing this and sharing this further. But I also just wanted to introduce, to kind of direct everybody to our roadmap. We put this up on arXiv and as an open source to kind of give everybody out in the open of how we're attempting this. And we have a whole suite of reasons of why we chose sperm whales. The biggest brain, they're like us and different. And they are, in our mind, one of the more alien species that if we could connect to this, we could connect to anything. And we're really hoping that the tools that we develop here will be used for elephants, for birds, for bats, for for plants. And yeah, anyway, we're so thankful to be here again and to be here again next year to share updates as we move forward and to bring everyone on this journey. So with that, I'll pass off to Pratyusha.
Okay, so thank you everyone. I think I'm really excited to be here. And just to introduce myself, I'm Pratyusha, and I'm a graduate student at the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab at MIT. And today I'm going to be talking about Project Seti and our roadmap to deciphering the communication of whales. So what you're about to hear are the sounds of a sperm whale, an animal with the largest known brain to have ever existed on the planet. Sperm whales have rich social lives. They live in pods or groups in amazingly complex matriarchal societies. They do several activities together, coordinate and dive together, socialize in groups, and have even been seen to babysit the young ones of one another. These behaviors are fairly complex and requires the whales to be able to model the other individual's mind to a significant degree. They have a neocortex and spindle cells, structures that in humans control our higher thoughts, emotions, memory, language, and love. Besides these fascinating behavioral traits, there's another thing very special about them. Sperm whales live in a world full of sound where light is very limited and sound travels 4 times faster. Underwater, sound is a major mode of sensing and perception. Sperm whales not only use sounds to communicate, but also to echolocate. Their nose is like a powerful sonar system which helps them build a representation of the world around them. Communication clicks come in more distinct types of groups called codas, and these clicks are non-directional and are typically generated by the whale in the presence of another whale. It's really fascinating to think about what is the role of communication in the lives of sperm whales and also other animals, and more specifically, what is the complexity of their communication. While communication can be verbal or non-verbal, communication via sound tells us about the ability of an organism to consolidate their sensory experience into a symbol to effectively coordinate and communicate with a fellow individual. It also tells us about their ability to compose and structure complex responses and is a major sign of intelligence. But to really understand the complexity and to test for the presence of language, we want to break down this question into studying these 5 different parameters. So the first one being discreteness or the presence of units. The second is grammar or how they structure and compose these units. The third is the presence or absence of long-range dependencies. Fourth is productivity, which is the ability to use language to create an infinite number of messages. And finally, displacement, which is the ability to talk about things that are not directly in front of you. Until now, only humans seem to have complex enough language structure that they've used for communication, cognition, and to pass and accumulate knowledge. So how do animals teach each other very complex strategies and the meaning of their calls? While studying animals in captivity can teach us about their amazing ability to learn new things, studying them in the wild will help us study what the existent communication protocols that have come to evolve and exist in the wild. So the main question is that if given a collection of unstructured sounds and behaviors from a species living in a very specific environment, can we discover the smallest units, rules, meaning, and hopefully communicate back? And this is particularly interesting and also challenging because this requires us to translate from a set of vocalizations and behaviors to a language we know without any existing speaker of both the languages. This also requires us to translate between languages spoken in very, very different worlds. And hopefully the study and the algorithms that we develop can be cross-applied to animals, other animals, including elephants, birds, or other primates, to secluded tribal groups, to aliens, if we ever encounter any, or even to the messages of the cells in the brain that probably send to one another, which can be thought of as some kind of a communication. But more interestingly, the only known machine or algorithm or person that can figure out and speak a language of a completely different world is a baby. So I think one question that's very important to ask is, why is it going to be different this time? People have tried to learn the language of animals several times before, but why is it going to be different this time? And the reasons are really the following two. First being data, the ability to collect, process, and learn from large-scale multimodal data. And the second, really, the interdisciplinary team of Project Seti, and also interspecies. So on the side of data, I think there's two main things. One is the size, and the second is the multimodality. So if you were to look in retrospect at the evolution of human language analysis by computers, we can see that early approaches relied heavily on a priori assumptions about language, for example, handcrafted rules or grammatical structures. And this limited the scope of application of NLP to known languages and required a lot of human guided processing and annotation. This obviously precludes the application in settings where language is new or unknown, like in our case. What happened in the field more recently is a shift from handcrafted rules to statistical and machine learning models that can extract the structure and rules from examples of text. This is also true in the study of perception and interaction in that, like robotics. It has really been made possible because of three things: improved computing power, algorithmic and architectural developments, and most importantly, large-scale data. How large a data set do we really need to train these modern language models? Just to give you an idea on the order of magnitude, BERT, a model from 2018, used a data set collected from English Wikipedia containing around 2.5 billion words. GPT-2, a model developed by OpenAI, used 10 billion words, and a newer version of the same used around 500 billion words. For comparison, the Dominica sperm whale project, probably one of the largest bioacoustic data sets that Professor Shane Giro and his team have been collecting in the past 15 years, has so far collected about 100K annotated clicks, which is orders of magnitude lesser. So with the next few years, we're talking about collecting qualitatively larger data sets that we believe will help us really explore this field further. Another interesting insight has been the following. Until very recently, translating between languages required parallelly mapped data from one language to another. In a series of papers in 2018, Lampel et al. Showed that it's possible to do completely unsupervised translation by geometrically aligning independently trained word or phrase embeddings from two different languages in the high dimensional space, producing automatic correspondences between words or some kind of a translation. It even works with languages that are dissimilar, such as English and Chinese, but the performance drops as the context of the language becomes more and more dissimilar. And by that, I mean if the worlds of the speakers of the two languages are very different or diverge, it's like doing this kind of a translation can become increasingly challenging. So this brings us to why it's important for us to not only collect a large data set, but also a large multimodal data set, which captures different aspects of the context in which the different sounds were made, and allows us to study how sounds, behavior, and actions tie together. Despite even rich perception and sensing, there will still be things that cannot be observed. For example, interactions of contact, which will make the setting particularly partially observable, but with increased amounts of data and context, we'll have more to go with. So how would this happen? The approach would comprise of the following key steps. First, we'd record and collect large-scale, longitudinal, multimodal data sets of whale communication and behavior from a variety of sensors, including tags, buoys, drones, swimming robots, and robotic fish. Then we process and reconcile the multi-sensor data, which would involve steps of tracking, IDing whales, and separating the sources of sound. Followed by that, we will decode using machine learning techniques, create a model of whale communication, characterize its structure, and link it to behavior. And finally, we will conduct interactive playback experiments to refine and evaluate the whale language model. Another interesting focus of the project will be to collect whale-calf-mother interaction to help us understand and study the process of acquisition in the baby whales and how it may be similar or just different from humans. So for more details about the project can be found in the archive paper. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pratyusha. And we are open for some questions right now. So if you have any questions, that was a wonderful, exciting talk. And let's open it up. And
This is
5
Eric Jarvis.
minutes.
I'll ask one.
Hi, Eric.
Hi, how you doing?
Bye.
So in the beginning, you had mentioned that there hasn't really been any studies that I think on one of your slides you said something about where there hasn't been communication through a language-like system with humans. And I was thinking of Irene's work, who's here, and others on parrots. So what do you think about that? Would you classify, or if you know about that work, would you not classify that as some type of low-level language communication?
Thank you for the question. So I'm sorry, I do not really say that it has not been done before. I think there has been lots of different attempts, including I think with dolphins, like trying to communicate through like a playboard, and like dolphins can click on different symbols to kind of respond to stimuli that the human's trying to give. And I think there's definitely been a lot of very, very interesting work, which has really inspired us to kind of take on this project. But like one way that it has been really held back is the amount of data that is available. And I think irrespective of like whatever approach we use, like the more data we have, really we can try to look for more correlations between like different modalities, and really this kind of multi-sensory data will help us build a fuller picture of what's going on, what are they talking about, like what,
right.
And like kind of discovering the units in their language rather than teaching them a language maybe which we want to teach them.
Okay, and quick follow-up, any sense already of what the click repertoire is like the number of different kinds of, I know you haven't looked at everything yet, of course, but just the variety of sounds that they produce as clicks. I'm just wondering, any sense of where you're at, what have you found so far in that regard?
Yes. So we've been looking at the Dominica sperm whale project data set. And so traditionally, sperm whale clicks have been grouped into several different coda types. And like the smallest unit of communication could be thought of as a coda. But in some of our initial studies, we've seen how like the variability within these coda types is significant and actually quite correlated between like what a speaker says and how the speaker receives a response. And another thing that we've been looking at is trying to see like how even within a click, like how much of a variability there can be. Like for example, in certain languages, even the intonation of how you say a word can mean a completely different symbol. And with sperm whales, they really have, if they can build like a rough picture of the world around them through echolocation, like they really have much better ears than we do in some sense. So like even within a click, like how much information can they really capture? So we've been looking at some of these things, and yes.
Thank you. We have time for, I think, another question. Joy Reidenberg. Joy, you had your hand up first. Next.
Hi, thank you. And I appreciate this talk on sperm whales because I myself am very interested in studying whales, as Diana knows. And I've also studied sperm whale anatomy for making sounds. But I was wondering if we're not focusing on the right thing when it comes to sperm whales, because their sounds are pretty limited in terms of, what frequency ranges they go into. It's only the spacing that really makes a difference. And I wonder if you're considering the spacing of the clicks rather than the clicks themselves as contributing a lot of information. For example, larger sperm whales have larger noses and therefore larger click intervals that advertise how big they are. And that's part of the communication that comes if you take into account the spacing between click sounds. So I'd just like to get your thoughts on the spaces as opposed to the clicks.
Yes, yes, thank you for the question. So we've been looking at both. So we've been looking at click spacing, or the interclick interval, which is commonly like used to represent like a vector of the interclick intervals is used to represent a coda. And so we've been looking at what are the existing coda types that are discovered in the data set that we have, but also like if the variability in these interclick intervals across the same category can be are intentional or unintentional or just noise. And if they are intentional, how can we conclusively prove that they are intentional? So we've been trying to do that on the interclick interval side, but we've also some other interesting observations on how probably group thinking of clicks as codas itself may not be enough, but there might be more like interesting structure within a coda, for example, like another thing that like for example with the variability within a click, you mentioned like maybe the interpulse interval is a reflection of the size of the head of the whale, right? A bigger whale would probably like it varies almost directly with the size. But what's interesting is within a coda, it's possible that the frequency can be varied in very interesting ways, like which frequency the whale decides to emphasize on. And we're just starting to also look at that, but also looking at interclick intervals and how the variability in that is really controlled versus how much of it is noise.
I think we're going to have to move on. I have some other questions from Kelly and Veronica. Can you save them and we'll get to you first in the next in our panel discussion. Okay, thanks. Okay, so thank you so much for that first fabulous talk. And I'm going to be introducing our next speaker now. We're going to be hearing now from Marcus and his colleagues.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, and congratulations on an amazing talk. The previous project sounds really interesting, and I think ours is a segue back to land, I would say. So we're going to be a team of presenters, and I'll just give a brief introduction into what we're doing. Let me share my screen, and we'll be basically having a conversation with you amongst each other and with you, hopefully. During the next 10 minutes. And while we're looking at the slides, we might be triggered to talk about some certain things, but otherwise we'll be looping the slides along the way. So we're interested in spider webs, and this is a team actually that involved many people from around the world. Ivan is here today, Tomas, of course, and myself, and the other people who participated, Isabel Su, my former graduate student, Ian Hadwick, Christine Southworth, who both have been very involved in the musical instrument with Ivan, as well as other students across the different labs that have been participating in this. We want to list them here all. But of course, the other big participant in the study, in this work, of course, the spiders that build webs and who we like to interact with. So the idea behind this project is to look at spider webs as really living materials, as an antenna that the spider uses to interact with the world, to learn to communicate with spiders. You'll see that in the discussion we'll have today, to understand the world of the spiders, which is both a material world of spider silk filaments made from proteins, but also the sensory world, the vibrations in which they live in. We're digitizing and building models of webs, especially analytical models. And Tomas will talk about his the world's largest collection of spider webs that he has in the studio, which is really exciting, that provides a memory of all the different kinds of webs that spiders can build. We have been looking at the mechanics of webs. My background as a material scientist, I look a lot at failure of materials. We've been interested in seeing how these materials fail and how they vibrate. And this sort of brought us into the discussion. Of course, we'll hear also today from Ivan about the musical side and how we can use webs as a harp. So we created, our team created a musical instrument that can be interactively played and performed. And we'll see and hear some of those things later today if there's time. And we're also using AI methods, of course, as many of you, to learn these vibrational signals and to be able to communicate and feed them back into the spiders. So we'll maybe show a little bit of that as well. And another area we're looking at is translation, not only with humans, but actually animal to animal. I think this was some great examples this morning. Thank you for sharing this. We can also imagine not only speaking humans to animals, but also animals to animals, which are not facilitated yet, but which we as humans might be able to facilitate. So we're very interested in looking at those as well. And so with that, I'm gonna just maybe start looping through the slides and invite maybe Ivan and Tomas to say a few words, introduce themselves. So this is Dr. Tomas here.
Yeah. Hi, Marcus. Hello. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, I'm so happy. We can keep looping the images if we want while we see. So there was just like a small story which has captivated my mind, with arachnophilia community, which is very broad. We work a lot with Peggy Hill, and which is invent the term of biotremology and many other things. But one thing which got my attention, which I would like also to mention very quickly, if we will need to give a grant to somebody who is able to communicate to some maybe non-human form of knowledge, it's like with Peggy Hill all the time we think about, there are some indigenous tribe living in Papua New Guinea. When a tsunami was happening, most of the people in Western or type of communities were watching the iPhone and trying to see if the tsunami was predicted. While the indigenous tribes were watching at the ants. The ants were feeling that something was going wrong, and the ants were going up to the mountains. They followed the ants, and none of them have died. It's been, you kind of recall this idea of Marisol de la Canela when she talked about the anthropo not seen. It's not the anthropocene like we think, but I like to kind of reframe this idea. There are some humans which are not even ourselves being able to talk, which have a lot of wisdom and knowledge that could be still connect and gain. This means, we have been, my studio and together with MIT and many Max Planck Institute, twice in Nature magazine. I just want to say, I'm very interested in science. We have been working a lot with Marcus. We keep working, but recently I was again in Cameroon with a spider divination village, and the way of how the village is organized and their decision politically and organization is by all the time asking questions to spiders. And it's a binary questions, and all the village is organized with the knowledge of the spider already, and they can communicate perfectly with them, and even is used in juridical court. If the spider answers for several times somebody is guilty, this person will go to jail also. This means there are a lot of knowledges in the world that already this is happening now. Hopefully the community of science also could not neglect and could not dismiss and could really hopefully make a better world if we also look at all this wisdom, this knowledge of that communities also. And I leave it there.
Always very difficult to follow Tomas with anything, but just wanted to say that the way it's easy to follow Tomas was into the world of the spider, which he brought me into along with Marcus, and I'm just really grateful for that. So my participation in this basically was twofold. First, interacting with one of Tomas's spiders directly, musically, and then also building the Arachnodrone Spiders Canvas installation with Isabel Sue, Ian, and Christine Southworth. And that was a more abstract way of thinking about the structures of the spider web and how that could be utilized in a musical way that would push us toward thinking differently about the music we make and the music we hear. Basically, I'm just grateful to both Marcus and Tomas for bringing me into this world, and of course to our beautiful Certifora spider that made all the material for us. So, back to Marcus.
Yeah, so as you could see in the background, I've been just circling through the slides, and maybe we can actually, we're at the right place here. This is some of the work on what you just saw playing in the video was the virtual reality environment that is the basis actually for that installation, right? That Ivan and Christine and Ian and Isabel developed and actually performed. And maybe Ivan, you could maybe share a few words on this. So I think the discussion, maybe I can show a little bit on how this works. Principally, so we have a model of a spider web, and you saw that in the beginning. I went through these slides very quickly, and this is a technique that Tomas envisioned and developed, and we applied that at MIT and formalized that into creating analytical models of spider webs, basically digital web graph models of spider webs that can then be utilized for various purposes, including the music. So this is an excerpt actually of Ivan's performance. Maybe you want to share a few words about this? I can try to play that. I don't know if you can hear it well, but
yeah, the diagram went by very quickly, but basically this is a 5-way collaboration. The first step being the web that the Certifora spider built, which Marcus's lab scanned, and which then Isabel Sue brought into Unity Gameware, so that we could, what we wanted to do was get a kind of spider's perception of inside the web. So what you're seeing is basically what she's seeing in the Unity environment, like what the vantage point would be moving within the web, obviously abstracted, and projected in such a way so that it feels like you're inside looking out rather than outside looking in. And then based on where she is and based on the structural relationships of the strings, those are generating potentially musical relationships, parameters, lengths of strings indicating frequency, other aspects of the strings indicating amplitude, field of vision indicating how many strings are being resonated at any particular point, and then most importantly also the resonance of other strings being based on just intonation principles. And those are all being fed into MaxMSP, which I'm sure most of you know is a audio processing language. And then Ian Hatwick is kind of sculpting those sounds. So there's Isabel, you can see her right there. There's me with some spiders. That's actually playing with the spiders. But in any case, which is another story, but with the spider's canvas, Isabel freely wanders inside the web. And then Ian takes the information that is being fed by her wandering, and he can sculpt it in basically using real-time audio processing. And then Christine and I improvise on top of that. And basically, it's also one of the reasons that the images look a little bit more less pure, I would say, than Tomas's actual webs, is that these are also superimposed with photography of. We were very inspired by Tomas's interest in the local spiders of wherever he is, and so Christine Southworth took many, many photographs of our local spiders and their webs, and we superimposed them with this. So what's nice about it is that it's actually it's a sonification, but it's a sonification as an instrument rather than as something that's spread out in a fixed time-based way. So it actually gives us a realm to be in and a realm to make music in, where we're responding, where nobody's in control, where we're all responding to the environment that's created by the web. And there's 4 of us, so we each have 2 hands. That gives us 8 limbs to work with. So we think of ourselves as a spider in that sense. So it's not really that we feel necessarily that we're gaining insight into the spider's perception, but just some kind of empathy toward what it would be like to be in that realm. Just trying to imagine what it would be like to be sensing those kind of vibrations and responding to them. And so we've been able to do it. Tomas was kind enough to invite us to do it at his exhibit at the Palais de Tokyo in Paris, and we did it there. And then we did it at MIT in performance several times. We've had it as an installation in the Nano Building at MIT. And so we've played it about, a dozen times, maybe more, and every time it's very different and very rewarding for us, certainly as performers, and hopefully for viewers and listeners.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very, very inspiring. And one of the things that is very remarkable, as you've all heard maybe in the popular press about silk, which is the material that makes the spider webs. So I showed at the very beginning a little bit of a graph on the multiple scales involved. So the webs you see, which have very intricate, interesting structures, actually themselves are composed of internal structures, which we call hierarchical internal material compositions. And when you think about spider silk and you study that, you'll see that it has a strength. Some silks, not all silks, but some silks have a strength that exceeds that of steel. And of course, it's a material that is made under very benign conditions out of very simple material, building blocks, proteins, and that is something that's very fascinating. And so my student Isabel also took the spider web and pulled it and stretched it, and this is what is shown in this slide here. And I won't go into the details, but one thing you can do once we have models of spider webs, of course, we can use them to create sounds, which you've seen, but we can also use these to explore certain aspects of signal transduction. And this is something that Tomas has actually done extensively in his studio. And maybe, Tomas, you could talk a little about this slide, and then the next slide shows some of the work we've done using AI and machine learning to understand these signals that Tomas has recorded. So Tomas, I don't know, you maybe share a few thoughts on what that is here. And I see Ivan again on this. So Ivan is part of that record of of how him playing an instrument interacts with the spider and responding to that and seeing what the spider can do or what we can learn from the spider?
Oh, I'm happy to speak to that, but Thomas,
Yeah, we have, guys, excuse me, we have about 56 seconds left, so, yeah.
Yeah, no, what I want to make sure that Marcus, and we know since many years with Evan, he's like the urgency need to expand the community. And what we do in arachnophilia, and I want to make sure that this is clear, the message to all the community and to what I have heard, that really to expand the community and not necessarily only is needed to a non-human, but there are many humans which hold such a great amount of knowledge that we really need to make the effort to go beyond the community or the people that we're talking today here. And that's maybe the kind of, I think, the more relevant point I could do, and I hope so it's very well understood. And it goes against maybe 15, 20 years of research that I have been doing, right? As I mentioned, right? And we talk through vibration with the telephone, with spiders, with tuning forks. We work with malaria, with Jonathan Ledgard about natural webs to prevent the infection of malaria. We have thousands and millions of projects, but I all came to the conclusion that it's really urgently that this community expand to really humans which are not being present and visible today. And they hold a lot of knowledge.
Thank you so much for such an inspiring talk, and the message of listening and learning and watching others, that these others have voices, is a nice way to segue into our question and answer. So if anyone has any questions, you can put it in the chat or raise your hands and I'll call on you. So we have, okay, so our first question is, what drew you to spiders? Any of you guys should answer.
Yeah, the first thing I will say is like, we should look, one big thing that we have contributed is stop thinking only about the animal in itself, right? Like Jakob von Wuchsel was taught. And this means what we have a new kind of way of calling is spider/web. We cannot separate the animal from the environment, from the milieu where it lives. This means the first decision is always talking about spider/web, that we can, it's like human detached from the planet Earth or from the sun, right? And it means it's always come together. And in this case, it is personally, well, when you look at a spider web, it really come together to the cosmic web. And this means there's a big relationship between both terrestrial webs and cosmic web. That was my personal choice.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Let's see. Any questions? I don't see any hands up. Am I missing? Let's see. Christine's asking, is it key to forget human language to really understand non-human animals?
I will not, sorry, but there is no one human language. And I think so the human language is predominant today is the one who is the capitalocene, is not the Anthropocene. Hence, we have to look again at this other Anthroponocene, about this indigenous tribe who are exactly know what is the behavior of the ants and the other non-humans, and they can decode it exactly and prevent and predict many things that today we have lost this capacity. And I want to make very clear, there's no one type of human language. There are many human languages. In Cameroon, the country with more human language, more than 700 alive human language, they even know the language of the spiders. And they are there. They should get the $1 million grant.
This interesting point there. So let's see, do we have any other questions? I have a bunch of them, but I don't want to monopolize this. Do we have any other questions coming up?
Roger Payne has a hand up, Diana. Roger has a question.
Oh, okay. I'm not seeing that. Don't see. Who has a question?
Roger Payne has a question. Roger,
Roger, go ahead. I'm not seeing your hand up. Okay.
What has anybody considered the possibility that back in prehistoric, pre-human times, that as a spider is spinning its web, if some dinosaur was roaring nearby it, would that actually be translatable if you could look at the details of that web in conditions where webs do join the fossil record, that you could actually translate it and hear the sound that was being made at the time?
Anybody want to answer that one or try?
I think Marcus should be put on the file.
Yeah, well, that's, I don't know if we have fossil records of spider, perhaps, I'm not familiar with that. And we are not exactly sure how the vibrations actually affect the construction of the web. We have some incipient knowledge, but once we had more detailed knowledge of this, one could potentially, I mean, I love the idea, of course. I mean, it's a fascinating idea. In looking back in time through a medium that's not obvious, and understanding that we can develop today. So I think it's a brilliant idea. I don't know enough about what we have in record, and we don't know the coding. Essentially, it goes from, we know a coding that is really human-centric, that goes from the spider web into audible sound that we can hear, and Devan described that beautifully. We're also beginning to understand a little bit what the spiders are doing and how they communicate with each other, but we don't necessarily understand fully how the construction of the web is affected by the environment. But in general, I think that's, it's a very interesting idea to study.
I think there are examples of spider webs in amber, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Yeah, fascinating. Yeah.
We had another question that came up, but it just disappeared on the screen. Is anybody seeing it? I cannot see it. So here it is. The question is, are the architectures of the web responding more to the cube shape and the natural environment? That's from Ken.
Probably a question Tomas can answer.
I didn't get the question. Sorry, Marcus.
So the question, was if the shape of the cubes, which most of the webs that at least we have built, and you might have built other webs in your studio, but how the shape of the cube, which we use to cue the spider to build the web, but then how that affects the structure versus being in nature.
That's, I mean, part of the question is already so wrong, like a spider are synanthropic, and this idea of separating nature from ourselves is part of the problem. Now, when we talk about spiders being synanthropic, it means they don't have the division of nature that we have. And spider weaves inside your home, as will be in the branches of a tree. When you look at the corner of your home, it's pretty 90 degrees and very regular. And it's again, it's home for who? Spider lives since 200 million years on the planet Earth, while human only 200,000. And usually a species to learn to know how to live in a place, minimum is between 2 and 4 million years. This means humans have a very long way to go, let's say, to call home a planet. And to think about what nature is in that relationship, where not even at the third of a million of a year, while spider 200 million years, right?
Okay, thank you all. And we're going to have it was a fascinating talk. Our next speaker is Tarje, and it's all yours, Tarje.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. This is such an amazing get together. It's really, really thrilling to be part of this. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Great.
You want to click into presentation mode. So it's just, yep, there you go.
I'm very sorry. I think I need to redo the sharing with sound. Okay, so it's actually an interesting transition because my collaborator Beth, who is supposed to be presenting with me here, did her PhD on spiders and then moved on to elephants just as well. So I think there's a lot of translational let's say scale invariance almost between different animals. But anyway, so I want to focus a bit more on different modes of communication. And I'm going to start out with a video capture that we did in the Kenyan savannah and basically put communication into a lot of context. So basically what we are trying to record is the entire vibroscape of this Kenyan savannah and see how different species respond to different factors. That is different other species, different environmental inputs, danger, for example, or just sort of regular communication and inquiry. So I'm just going to do this time-lapse video that we've recorded at this water dam in the specific region of northwest Kenya. And you see how complex this environment is. So not only different types of substrates and vegetation, but of course a lot of different species. On the top right, you see the different temperatures. And this is an environment that is difficult to disentangle from itself, right? So focusing on one species and the communication capabilities of one species is probably difficult to do if you take it out of context. So what we try to do here is to record the entire, what we call the vibroscape of this very complex environment, and then see if we can infer and decipher a bit more about this. So also notably, this is a 24/7 environment, and we've encountered various interesting species that we did not expect. So the questions here are, what on earth are they talking about, of course? But I think we need to sort of go back step by step in getting to this question and answer various different questions beforehand. So how on earth are they talking? What kind of mode of communication are they using? Next of all, are they talking inside Earth? And of course, myself as a seismologist, this is where I sort of come in. Now, I'm going to take another step back and sort of go back to the 5 senses that, of course, everyone is familiar with. But I think it's interesting to look at where communication is effective and where information transfer is very useful for any species, essentially. So just very broadly speaking, we have, of course, the sort of optical communication, which is through electromagnetic waves. And I mean, sort of neglecting solid propagation, I guess, for communication purposes, we mainly look at air, vacuum, and water. Now, with the ear, of course, I guess most people would associate communication through audible ranges, and that's the acoustic wave transmission through air and water. Now, as we go on, it gets a little more tricky. So taste, what is that? It's chemical dissolution. So it depends on direct touch. And although many of my geology colleagues go out in the field and lick rocks, this is not a typical way of sensing your larger scale environment. So I think the issue here is the lack of long range interaction with the environment, or is a communication basis. Now it's somewhat different, but in some ways also similar for smell, in a way that is that the information that comes through an incoming smell is through a diffusive process, and that diffusive process doesn't carry as much concrete information as these waves do. I'll get back to that in a moment. But I think that the most important thing is that it's more difficult with such diffusive processes to disentangle the information, incoming information, due to its origin. And this is very different for any type of wave propagation. So finally, there's the touch. And of course, there are many different ways of touch, but the one we're going to be focusing on is a touch that is sensing some sort of incoming oscillatory behavior. So in other ways, mechanical waves. So this is where a solid wave propagation comes into play. And I'm highlighting these 3 different senses here as those that depend on waves. And these are the sort of fundamental advantages that waves have in terms of communicating information. And that is long-range communication, and it goes through multiple scales. So you can, of course, have multiple pitches and whatever, overtones and so on. And that translates to sensing different structures along the propagation path as well. And as such, waves carry a huge amount of information. I would say by far the most efficient way of transporting information altogether. And I'm focusing on this a bit more than you might expect, because there is a peculiar additional level of information that comes with sort of seismic wave propagation. And this is the following. So basically, you have a 3-component system, and it carries compressional as much as shear type of wave propagation. You have dispersive waves, so they depend on their own scale, essentially. Some waves trapped along the surface or interfaces, and some propagate in the entire volume. And unlike the acoustic transmission or airborne transmission, seismic waves are independent, or more or less independent, of wind, noise, vegetation, and topography. So in theory, at least, we can propose that seismic communication could be extremely efficient and carry a huge amount of information for any species if they're able to do so. So what can we think of doing moving forward with? So of course, I think the main limit is an observation bias that comes from our own limited observation, just because of our own senses. But of course, we've learned, as we heard today already, about a lot of acoustic imaging and acoustic communication in terms of echolocation, for example, and other ways of sort of getting a sense of a 3D environment around you in both air and water. So nothing speaks against the fundamental idea of using the entire Earth that vibrates all the time due to earthquakes and all sorts of other noises. So the question is just, is there communication through seismic? And I suppose everyone here has heard about this, but it's important to note that most of this has been anecdotal and not really has found a solid scientific basis on which you can really move forward to deciphering the language. So this is what we're trying to do, basically. We went to Kenya 2 years ago and deployed a large array that tries to capture this entire vibroscape. So we deployed seismometers, so conventional earthquake type of seismometers, in a space of 6 kilometers in distance, in a multi-scale kind of setup. And then along with that, also acoustic microphones and video traps. So we really tried to get the entire sort of system, essentially. So this is me in front of a couple of elephants, which are not dangerous, I should say. And this is how the ear to the ground looks like. So we had to build cages, the seismometers inside of this, and we have a couple of acoustic transmissions as well. So what happens then? We record this. So it's a typical seismogram, but it's basically a wildlife quake. And what you can see here is in these video trap or camera trap snapshots, the time here that correlates to these peaks is exactly the footstep of the elephant next to this the seismic station. So in other words, these elephants produce a signal, at least in the near range, that we can record and use potentially for learning more about their communication. So of course, we have different ways of transmitting information, and one of them is the very prominent elephant rumble. So this is something that has been known by acoustic transmission, but it's something that we've recorded seismically as well. So what you hopefully hear in a moment is this very prominent deep vocalization that goes down to the infrasonic range and can go up to 120 decibels. So really enabling long distance, large scale propagation, and therefore communication essentially. So what we've recorded around this water dam are signals from various different elephant rumbles at distances up to 200 meters, for example, with the acoustic overtones at the top here, and in the seismic fewer overtones, but certainly very strong signals. So we've used that, and when we've used conventional sort of seismic or earthquake location techniques and to locate this quake essentially. And we wanted to see whether either one of these modes, the acoustic mode or the seismic mode, would fare better, or if in any case both could be used. And quite interestingly, we've used various techniques. And we found that for all the data that we've selected, essentially, the seismic data, the seismic propagation of this rumble through the ground fared better than the acoustic one. So in other words, elephants can have an advantage if they communicate through the ground rather than through the air in terms of these rumbles. So one might think I would like to call this animal intelligence for AI. With a learning data set of 50 million years in the same environment, they must have evolved a lot of capability to really harness the richness of information that propagates through the ground. So what we found is that we can localize these elephants that rumble down to 1 meter distance, and this works for at least 200 meters. So interestingly, with seismic faring better than acoustic, this raises a lot of questions about how elephants actually use this in the field to actively communicate with other herds. So this was one project, and another one with the same data set essentially was to train a neural network on seeing whether we can characterize and discriminate between different species and their behavior. So what we did is basically we used around 200,000 images from the camera traps and then labeled those with animals and activities and so on, and then trained a neural network to understand the seismic waveforms according to these labels. And on the top left, you see just a few examples of how these spectrograms, in this case, look like. So you have a time axis to the right and a frequency axis to the in the y direction. And these are the different types of signals. And essentially, the neural network kind of tries to learn the features of the spectrogram and labels them with these different animals and their different behaviors. On the top right, you see a rumble and a locomotion, just an elephant passing by in this example. And what we've done is basically then combine different ways of neural network architectures and found that even with this rather small data set, actually, we've achieved a really high accuracy in discriminating between different species and also different behaviors. So rumble versus walking, slow walk versus fast walk, and so on. And in pretty much all cases, the accuracy was 80 to 90% for this data set. So we found this extremely encouraging, and it's a paper in review that we will build on in the future. And this is essentially a sort of baseline to think about seismic wildlife monitoring in a very efficient manner. So why is this interesting?
Excuse me, we have about another, if you can finish up in about another minute, that'd be great.
Okay, I'll try, yeah. So basically the seismic monitoring has a lot of advantages by having 360-degree view, a lot further propagation distance, and it's a lot more economic. So let me summarize here. Essentially what we've shown is that elephants use motion, maybe not to the extent of a Tohoku type of earthquake, but they do allow us to basically understand what we've been missing, and that is animals emit, record, and most likely use as seismic information. The propagation has advantages over acoustic waves, and the seismograms are sufficient to localize and discriminate. Now, this raises a lot of questions, and that is, what is the component of the rumble used for? Does it enable long-distance communication? Do other species infer and localize elephants stomping and rumbling? And how do animals change behavior upon different changing factors from the outside? And of course, finally, can we devise an acoustic monitoring system? And this is the last slide. This is where we're going to next year, and that is looking at a very dense seismic array in collaboration with a UK-based startup to deploy cheap sensors, thousands of them, and then see if we can really build an online real-time
Finally, neck out.
that
Preferate so again like then the house is a phone. That's like is it today? I promise James to pretty come.
Right. What you've just heard is a machine learning without training the language. So that is basically a perfectly valid sounding language without giving any rules. So this is, I think, what we need to go to understand these wiggles better. We need to decipher that in a lot more detail. So I'll just stop here and leave this up for questions.
Thank you so much for a wonderful talk. Can we have questions again? Let's, from the audience, please put your questions in the chat or raise your hand. Hopefully I'll see them. Veronica. Veronica, do you have a question? I see a hand raised, your hand raised.
Yes, sorry. Now the mic is on.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for putting this great meeting together, and thank you for the very interesting talk. I am myself an elephant communication researcher, but focusing on the airborne communication. And I was wondering how much information you really think that they can transmit. You were showing the spectrograms of the rumbles and then also of the seismic communication. And I realized that you can only see one strong harmonic, which I think was maybe not even the fundamental, but the second harmonic. And I was wondering if this is what is mostly transmitted, the second harmonic, or how much is really transmitted through the seismic.
Yes, this is, I think the question that we're currently looking at is do elephants actively use this as a complementary mode, or do they choose this to be the preferential mode for certain situations? For example, one could imagine if there's very strong wind or airborne noise, then this is a hugely preferential mode of communication, in which case it's totally sufficient to have one harmonic and then propagate it over large distances. So I think in terms of transmitting information, it doesn't necessarily need to be multiple harmonics, but we think that they basically have probably learned to use multiple modes simultaneously. And the second is of course that seismic communication is independent of topography and so on. So you can imagine that different herds can communicate over extremely large distances with hills in between, which is more difficult for acoustic transmission. So we think it's probably a give and take depending on the situation. This is of course something that we'll try to examine in the next round.
Thanks. We have another question. I think this will be our last question for this Q&A. Marcelo Magnasco. Marcelo, you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to know, have you tried playback experiments? Have you tried actually producing sounds to be transmitted infrasonically through the soil and monitoring the elephants' reactions to see if they are actively listening to these and how they...
Yes. So this is mostly the work by my colleague Beth Mortimer, the zoologist in our group. I should say there's a collaboration across many disciplines, and she has published a paper recently on seismic playback experiments. So she's done acoustic playback and then with some limitations because it's more difficult to perform transmitting motion actually into the ground and then see how they react. So this was at very close distances where you can actually record their behavior. And they've analyzed very statistically significant reactions to these different signals. it is difficult, I should say, because the coupling of signals to the ground is difficult to replicate. So one would have to basically get the exact same coupling that elephants do in the playback experiments. And this is something that is in the works in terms of how one can technically translate that. But absolutely, this is exactly where we're going. Yeah.
Well, so I think this is a great time to open up the panel discussion. So if all of our speakers can sort of join together now, again, turn your mics on, and we can open it up for a 10-minute discussion and Q&A. So first, we had a question earlier from Kelly Jackola. Kelly, you ready to go?
Yeah. Hi. So it's actually good that this is in a group, because it may apply to more than just the talk about the cetacean initiative, which is great. I love it. But I was struck by when you listed out the language characteristics, and you talked about displacement, which is of course very, very important, but it also makes the problem a lot harder, right? Because as humans, we actually specifically don't go around talking about things that are in our immediate vicinity. I don't go around naming things and telling you what I'm doing and that sort of thing. But that is what we're looking for when we're looking at animal communication. And so on the one hand, while we want displacement to be there because it would be cool and like language, you kind of hope it's not, because it makes the problem easier. And so in that respect, I was struck by the idea of looking at moms and calves, because the way that it was talked about was looking at it in terms of language learning. But I wanted to also introduce the idea that that's also a potential way in the sense that certainly with humans, the kinds of things you talk about with your infant are much more easily discoverable. You are talking about what's about to happen and what you want them to do, et cetera. Whereas with you and I, when we're talking about specifically not that. So I just wanted to get people's thoughts on that.
Any of our panelists want to respond to that one?
I could say something. So I think that's a really beautiful point. And and to really understand when animals might be talking about displacement, you might want to understand things that they're referring to, which may not really be observable from their current sensory observations. And I think there's this really wonderful book called How Children Learn the Meaning of Words. And it talks about how the first set of words that babies learn tie to things that are immediately observable, and then they start to learn concepts such as gone, which you maybe cannot really see, but it's more related to a feeling or a sensory. So yes, I think maybe when studying the order in which the calves probably acquire different symbols, it could possibly help us ground the meaning of the words as they learn them. And then kind of if they refer to certain words in contexts where the sensory information is missing, then we can say that, okay, here they talked about this thing, but they don't really see it around the same time. And that might help us give us some hint of or evidence of some kind of displacement, like you mentioned.
I was just going to pop in and add that we do have lots of evidence for displacement from some of the studies that have been done with great apes. Sue Savage's work has shown this. Irene Pepperberg's work has shown this. So I think this is a great way to get our group talking and maybe having a whole meeting on evidence for certain kinds of behaviors that come from studies of animals in human care, as well as and how that could help us with these wild studies. So yeah, because there is evidence for that. Irene, I don't know if you want to pop in with anything here. Are you here still there, Irene, or Sue?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, that's how, those of us who have been working with the animal-human communication, obviously that's how we do it. But the other interesting thing is that people have done something like this in birdsong, okay, where we're looking at the, young birds' interactions with the senior tutors and of that nature. So it is, there is some precedent for that in the field work already. And we've learned a lot about, which bird the young bird learns from. Okay, it's not always dad. Okay, but doing much better in terms of, getting dominance over the group. And so I'd be better off learning my song from him, things like that. So yeah, I mean, this is something that we have taken into account.
Thanks, Irene. Thanks, Irene. We have a question from Sonia. Sonia, right here. Oh, Sue, I'm sorry. Did you want to? Sue, I didn't see. Were you trying to say something?
Just real quick.
Sorry. Come on, I didn't see your hand.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi.
Oh, I just wanted to say that one of the things all animals do is move. They go from location to location, and to stay together and to know where their animals are requires a sense of displacement. And that was just really, really easy to communicate to the bonobos when we put the idea of displacement within the forest and we're talking about where we're going. It just popped in a day. So I think because a lot of the captive studies occur in cages or where the animal is in one place, it might be difficult, but it's not difficult in the natural situation, which people are moving to, and I think is great.
Thanks, Sue. Sonia, you had a question?
I had a question about the honey, the birds, the honey.
Honey guides?
Yeah, I wondered, as there are fewer human hunters of honey, is the culture of the birds changing? Are they getting their honey in different ways? Do you know? I mean, as you stop having this cooperative interaction, is the culture of the birds also changing?
Thank you for that really interesting question. It would appear so. It's a difficult thing to study directly, but it's certainly true to say that in places where humans aren't on a regular basis harvesting wild honey anymore, you're much less, your chances of being guided by a honey guide are much lower. So it would appear that honey guides do unlearn or lose their ability to guide humans in such places, whether they need to interact with non-responsive humans to lose an innate ability to guide them. We don't know. This is something that we're working on at the moment. How do honey guides get wax when there aren't any humans around to cooperate with them is a very interesting question as well. And our best guess is that they're able to scavenge enough wax from nests, which bees in Africa move nests a lot following the rains, following the availability of water, and our best guess is that they're able to scavenge enough wax to survive in such places. They do also eat other things. They eat insects and so on. It is remarkable how common honey guides can be in places where there's active honey hunting, but we're biased by the fact that they come to us. So to actually study honey guide density is a difficult thing because it's one of the downsides of studying a bird that wants to talk to you. But thank you for your very good point.
I see another hand. Vince, you have a question?
This is a question for the arachnophilia folks. I'm just wondering whether the signals of prey in the web are distinguishable. Does anyone? I don't know whether it would be important for a spider to know what did I just catch, but is there any indication that the signals are distinguishable?
Maurice? Somebody? I'm sorry. Anybody?
Tomas, answer. Tomas?
Tomas?
You want to answer, Marcus?
Yeah. So the question was if the signals are different for different kinds of prey. I suspect the answer is yes. We know that the signals are quite different for different activities of the spider, communication or integrity testing or mating or other things that they're trying to do. And I suspect from observation that the signals for different prey are going to be different as well. But I think Tomas, I don't know if Tomas, you wanted to say something, right? I wasn't sure.
No, we always use this different tuning fork with different frequencies, and we can mimic the the frequencies of every interaction among the different species of spiders. And this is very common among the arachnologists. When you go out to the field, you have a tuning fork and you have to match the right frequency for the right spider, for the spider to come over to you. And then there are a lot of cheating spiders who mimic the behavior of ants, making them believe that are ants, but actually are spider who eat the other spider. This means the frequency range among the different mode of vibration of the web, you could quite start to predict a little bit, behavior, but it happened among them. Like the cheating spider is something quite common also, of learning behavior of other animals among them.
Thank you. We have time for one more quick question and answer before we take our break. Tarje, the question is for you. Does moisture content of the soil impact on the transmission of seismic waves? And if it does, do you expect climate change to impact the long-range communication of animals? That's a really good question. Tarje?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Thanks very much for the question. Very important one. And of course, one of our driving points here to put this into the context of biodiversity loss and climate change. So in the past field deployment, we had basically selected a dry season on purpose just to capture the whole environment and then have fewer control variables basically. But in this next season, we're hoping to transition the wet to the dry, the dry to the wet season and examine exactly those kinds of effects. So I also didn't have time to mention the different parameters that we've varied in different ways of modeling the substrate, from sand to wet ground to topography and that sort of thing. So we of course know this seismologically, and that the coupling of an elephant foot to the ground is extremely important to produce an amplitude. So I think this is absolutely important. Whether we can extract the correlation to actual climatic changes is a different question, because it's a fairly long scale question. But those are exactly the problems that we're interested in. And we have also data, I saw that elsewhere, about wind and other noise factors and so on, and GPS tracked lions and cattle, for example. So of course, the correlations between all these factors and how they interplay with the human-wildlife conflict are exactly what we're after in the longer run.
Well, thank you. I just want to thank all of our speakers for such fabulous, exciting, provocative talks, and our audience for the great questions. We are going to take a break now and come back at 11:05 for our curated conversations. See you all back soon.
Okay, let's rejoin for the workshop. We've had an inspiring morning. Now we go to work. So we have workshops coming up on hardware, software, internal within the this community, and external outreach and communicating with the public, with obviously lots of overlaps. And then as a reminder, the Interspecies project is not itself a funding source. This isn't a session to ask for money, but it is a vehicle to bring together people, projects, and proposals, and has and potentially can raise funding through the community. So hardware, this is to look at tools, interfaces, infrastructure, test beds, who is doing what, who needs what. And I'd like to start with a report card and a challenge for the group. And while I'm doing that, you can both post comments, questions to the chat and raise hand. And then this is open time. We'll have half an hour for that conversation. So I'm going to share, let me go to the right place, this window. Since the last meeting, the Interspecies IO site was created, which is great. And Interspecies IO as an organization was created, thanks to a lot of people, in particular Will's work. And thanks to a lot of people, including Mark's work, the Slack group was created. So that's progress. Then the challenge, my involvement started back with Peter just simply through, in my lab, there was a multi-point control unit. This was in the pre-Zoom era. And we used this as the head end for infrastructure for early forays into it. That was part of a lab I run that has tools to make almost anything of any size. But those were only available to elite researchers. So we started setting up community fab labs to expand, not tell people what we're doing, but give them the means to do it. And then they accidentally went viral. And there's now about 2,000 of these in 125 countries. And I mentioned this for a couple of reasons. One is Mark mentioned a mapping project. This site is a front end to a back end infrastructure that lets you navigate what labs are where, what are the commons in the community that they share, how do you access them. That gives us an optic view of what this community is doing globally. And that visibility has been an important part of the growth of the network. And so Mark will tell you more about an effort to do this, to map the Interspecies project as one challenge. Then this event has been a great series. The Fab Network has been running now blended global events that rotate around the world. And this would be an interesting challenge for this network. It spun off a Fab Foundation, and a big step in the last year was creating a nonprofit in the US and UK that provides operational capacity. These are all the things the Fab Foundation does. And again, it's not a money source, but it creates a channel that money can flow through. And that's been very effective in fundraising. And so a big step in progress has been creating that infrastructure for this progress. Some of the things that spun off then are a means to make commitments. So these are all cities that have signed up to a Fab City commitment to its work in a 40-year countdown to producing what they consume. And potentially we could do the same thing in the regions we're working. One of the things that spun off from that is this is now legislation under consideration in the US House and Senate for universal access to digital fabrication as a new kind of right, like access to communication and computation. That would be another goal we could try to do. And it points to the ability to even undertake projects like this needs the ability to speak as a group, not as individuals. Then the network has spun off classes to teach skills in it that started with digital fabrication and biology and textile technologies and growing food, propagating skills. And a big part of that were classes with what we call hello worlds, which are simple demonstrations of how to practice these skills. Potentially we could develop that. An important part is open designs of machines. And so this is a platform sharing open designs of a range of machines to share tools. So each project like this doesn't have to start from scratch. A really important project, this is work I did and Fran, who's part of the production team, on a universal web interface for translation. Here, it's universal translation in machines. We could aim to do the same sort of common translation infrastructure across species. And then a final note is most of those things I showed you use backend infrastructure, a server called GitLab that does web serving and project management. We have one of these running that can provide the backend infrastructure for all the things I just described for this collaboration. So those are just some starting comments on what we've done for infrastructure in the last year and what it might look like to tackle all the things that come after that in the next year. So with that as a challenge, we now have half an hour to talk about hardware, who's doing what, who needs what, what's rate limiting, what's encouraging. We heard this morning about Project Seti, Vibroscope, some other interesting projects percolating are Sue's Universal Keyboard. We'll hear tomorrow about dog interfaces, Diana's work on keyboards. Vint?
So, note to self, don't follow Neil either. Thank you so much for the detailed example of what's been done on the fab side. It's really interesting to try to translate what you've been able to accomplish there into the kinds of things that people might want to do in the interspecies communications research area. So this is probably not just about hardware, but it's about sharing of the state of the world of the various projects that are underway. So you showed this picture of the many different groups that are participating in the fab work. How hard is it for them to keep that stuff up to date? I mean, frequently you end up with somebody says, let's get all this stuff organized, and they do something, there's a big push, and then nobody continues to maintain the information up to date. How's that working out?
Yeah, I'd say there's, so sites you just build die. There has to be an incentive to maintain it. And there's I'd say three ways that gets maintained. One is incentives. So for the fab example, we have companies, funders, donors, educational institutions that do something good if you're represented there. So you can get ECTS education credits, or you can get free software. There's resources you get by being listed there. So that's one, there's an incentive to opt in. A second one is, I mentioned the video bridge in the pre-Zoom era. In the post-Zoom era, we run always on video water coolers, places where you can come and just hang out and do unscheduled, unscripted interactions. And that kind of sort of, that means to interact is a second incentive of just sort of, joining a community. And then a third one that I didn't expect is the role of the educational programs. So we had to invent our own from scratch. And now in an interesting way, it's getting overlaid with traditional educational programs. And it spawns a virtuous circle where each year it helps not central out, but sort of collective to collective, propagate best practices, train a collaborating cohort. And so the role of education in sort of building the community is something I didn't anticipate in the beginning. Many of the people in the call are associated with educational institutions, but explicitly taking on an educational focus ended up being in some ways almost the core function we did that drove everything else. And so all of those tow behind them the websites as sort of derived activities.
Thank you. Let's see if we have any other comments.
Yeah, so some of the projects we've heard about and haven't heard about in building the means, the infrastructure, I want to hear about what was rate limiting, what was difficult, what help do you need, hardware, software production. Mark, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm interested, and from a hardware perspective, I'm really interested in what can be done or what is being done to support people, regular people, all over the world, to gather information and to share it. I'm thinking about what might be referred to as, citizen science. I was intrigued when Christina Hunger's book came out, how I taught Stella how to talk, and then I went to Amazon and typed in dog buttons, and there's a plethora of dog and other kind of animal buttons available there. To the best of my knowledge, none of them are jacked into the net. And at the same time, I am aware of multiple, much more high-end projects, some of them many hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars, that are connected to the net. And so I'm just really intrigued by what could be done to help support lots of people playing with their animals, with their pets, and others, and helping to build up a knowledge base. Yeah.
Let me make two suggestions to start. Again, I'm mentioning the fab example for two reasons. One is it's just an example of scaling, but one is it's the means of production that are very relevant to your question. One thing I didn't show, but is really, really important now that I think about it, is pretty early on, we realized we needed a fab charter, which was a concise statement of rights and responsibilities. I'll put this in the chat after the session. Every word in it was fought over. It was surprisingly difficult to do, but it's been really important to have this concise statement of the values of the group and the right and responsibilities of the group. So I think that would be one really useful exercise. That was surprisingly important in creating commons. And then the second, looking at Vint as I make this comment, is there were lots of different networks. What the internet pioneers did such a good job on is interoperability, a core set of standards that were neither too specific nor general, but just sort of the right level of abstraction for interoperability. So in the Fab network, one of the analogs to that was a humble spreadsheet of an inventory. And this was a snapshot of best practices to set up one of these facilities, and all of the other ones shared that same inventory. So anything you did at any one would be interoperable with any other. So those two things together would add up to this charter of sort of rights and responsibilities to opt into the network, and then a snapshot of a core toolbox to be able to do the sort of things we've been hearing about, so that each effort doesn't need to figure out how to do it from scratch. By the way, let me make one a supporting note about how you pay for all of that. One of the early mistakes was to either assume it's just research funding or you make businesses out of it. We've been finding sustainable financial models are a much more interesting place that's not quite either of those. In part, it's in all of the above, where you teach classes and you work with companies and you work with philanthropies and you create infrastructure. And so there's synergies across those types of funding. But one of the other interesting things we find in the FAB network that's surprisingly relevant to this, with the work of people like Jonathan Ledgard on animal-based money, is looking beyond a traditional dollar-denominated economy where you work for money for consumption. But once you expand access to the means of production and you develop ways to price contributions, it leads you to places like Bhutan's gross national happiness, where the economy isn't denominated in spending money. And so thinking about ways to price the resources, the benefits to ecosystems of the animal resources and the contributions, looking beyond just simply trying to raise traditional money to pay for what we do.
Tomas Saraceno has a question.
Yeah, I have a small question. I mean, two things is how we can 7 billion or more people become sensitive to the environment. I always remember Laurie Anderson said when there was a spider once, very beautiful, and then when the solar eclipse happened, you know, she started to weave all the web and then rebuild it again, right? This mean there is a certain sensitivity, and this mean I'm thinking about a citizen science app where all citizens around the world can really start to observe the change of behavior of animals in relationship of how they sense the environment. Something very, very basic, but it's really like a get out about these hummingbirds, all these kind of more, maybe kind of indigenous knowledge that somehow have not been thought yet, and somehow we have to get that knowledge, no? The indigenous tribes sensing the ants going up the mountain before the tsunami get, and much faster than any Google or internet was able to do it, and they were safe thanks to that. And I mean, it's really like, I don't know, there's kind of an initiative maybe to really open up the discussion to a much broader and wider possibility of sense the environment.
So Tomas, to map that onto what we're doing right now, one task for that is, what is the sensor package that goes to a local interface with animals? And there's a hardware piece for that, that in fact could leverage all the things I just spoke about. One part of that is, what is the backend software infrastructure to organize 1 billion people doing citizen science? That's the next thing Vin will be talking about. The next topic for that is, how do we organize ourselves to deploy that? Let's see, that's Mark's session. And then the next question is how we communicate to the world this is happening, and that's Peter's session. So it's a wonderful vision. What we're now going to try to do in each of these sessions is start to pick that apart to, you know, the first steps to get there. Let's see.
Valerie has a question.
Valerie and then Diana. And not just questions, comments. This is a conversation. Go ahead, Valerie.
Oh, hello, everyone. Sorry, I'm half Italian, half American, and I'm just an individual, you know, and not academic sort of thing.
Well, we're all just individuals here.
Yeah, I know. But, you know, I've been, I don't know how to describe myself, you know, an artist, an activist, a visionary sort of things. So yeah, one of my many questions, you know, I have 3 or 4 questions. Really, one is for Vint, you know.
I'm going to interrupt Valerie. Right now, we're doing 4 working groups. This is right now hardware. We're going to do software next, then internal, then external. And these are really looking at what do we need to do to create each of those. So
yeah, but it's something that has to do with hardware in a way.
Go ahead then.
You know, so that's what I wrote. I can't help but recall the last scene of Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, one of my all-time favorites along with E.T. and AI, when a team of scientists endeavored to talk with aliens from outer space through devices that would send beep signals off to them, and they would ultimately respond to those signals. No? Following Vince's final statement on TED Talk 2019, I was amazed contemplating that there could be means allowing other species to interact with us and vice versa. So does the ultimate goal of interspecies IO eventually match the longing for communications with alien life forms too? I mean, there's an outward thing, as in the movie, you know, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and maybe, I don't know, in the near future would allow us to communicate with forms of life, you know, from outer space. I know it's, it's a big question.
You know, my first reaction is that if you think of non-human species communication, and aliens are just another form of non-human species communication. So in some sense, everything that we're doing here is to some extent relevant. There are obvious questions, though, about any kind of communication. What do you have in common? Do you have sensing capability in common? Do you have cognitive information in common? In the absence of commonality, it's very hard to establish communication or even to demonstrate it. So one of the things that you can hear from the discussions that we've had so far today is that, especially the cooperation between like the bird guide or the honey guides and the honey hunters, is that they share a common interest. In this case, it's beeswax and honey. And so we would need to figure out what things we could possibly have in common with a non-human species. In order
but as far as I can follow
Valerie, I'm sorry to interrupt, but just for fairness, we need to keep going for time. So Diana, then Leo, then Chaz.
Yeah, I was actually going to pass. I just wanted to mention one thing in response to the comment earlier about from Mark about how we can coordinate activities around activities where, for example, he used the example of the Fluent Pet buttons. I know the fabricator of that, the CEO of that company is with us. And Leo, you're right here because I know you have, I want to pass mine to Leo because he could answer that question. Okay, thank you, Leo.
Thanks, Diana. Yeah, so we are very fortunate that we've been able to kind of create a going concern of a business, a profitable business by building hardware for the tens of thousands, maybe now hundreds of thousands of people that are really interested in teaching their dogs to communicate. So we absolutely have plans on our roadmap. I don't want to give everything away, but we definitely would like to have these things be connected. We are doing this as part of an open science project that we'll be talking about tomorrow. The important thing that I think we want to think about is like, how do we make an economic model where the incentives of the business are aligned with the mission that we're trying to accomplish? In our case, you know, the mission is like, let's teach them to talk. We have built a community of people we call guides, also known as affiliates or sometimes influencers. These are people who have made a lot of progress teaching their dogs to communicate. They have large social media profiles, and they get a referral commission when they share a video that other people like, and then it leads people to go and click and try and teach this to their dogs themselves. So we think there actually can be a really great and profitable and rapidly growing economic model that kind of crowdsources the very, very difficult problem of communication with other species. I mean, we've got what, 100 billion humans have died so far. Each of them lived on average maybe 25 years. So that's like 2.5 trillion person years of work went into human language development. This is why I think it's going to take a very large village probably to like recapitulate some of that when it comes to communication with other species. And that's our approach.
Leo, talk about your experience from prototyping to DFM to production.
Yeah, so our original product was called the Clever Pet Hub, and we still think it's a great thing. It's like a computer game console for dogs. The idea being that you've got all these dogs that have thousands of hours alone at home. They're sitting in front of the TV. These really sophisticated entertainment appliances are now connected to computers and to the internet, and they have great audio and great video. And if we had the ability to add a really precise food reward device and some software to it, we'd be able to very interestingly engage with the thousands of animals that are alone and have literally nothing better to do every day. So that was the original idea. And then Christina Hunger showed the world that you don't need armies of programmers and petabytes of data to really make meaningful progress in communication with other species. You can take a $5 recordable sound button and put it in front of a dog, and they'll learn how to use it, and they'll learn how to apparently use bunches of them in apparently contextually appropriate ways. So I actually spoke with Christina. I'll go into this a little bit tomorrow, but I spoke with Christina. I said, you don't need to organize your buttons in terms of in a flat square Cartesian grid with plywood, which is extremely difficult for anyone to remember the location of the button if it's just, you have to kind of count where the buttons are. So instead, the idea was, let's organize them in terms of, hexagons, so you can have kind of neighborhoods. Anyway, so we spoke, we ended up not working together, but we worked with the hundreds of other people who had seen what Christina was doing, and they were also needing this hardware that they could use. And so we worked with them. We started meeting with them every couple of weeks. We ended up by June of last year, we had a prototype of kind of interlocking hexagons that helped people organize buttons. We started selling them right away on the first, in June, we were profitable. And by September, we had, thousands of them already out. So it was an iterative process and it was very much based on direct communication with our customers.
I'd like to just interject. My hand is still up because I wanted to bring this up now because this is one of the fundamental challenges we have as a community. Sue Savage-Rumbaugh is on the line with us, Irene Pepperberg, Penny Patterson. I've been working with keyboards since the 80s. And the challenge for all of us is, how do you document the kinds of interactions we're getting across time? And if we want to be able to show that there's something meaningful going on, we have to find ways to document it. And this is really a fabulous time for us to be getting together because, many of us have moved to touch screens rather than keyboards, and we're trying to build upon the work that we've done or that others have done. And I know, Sue, you had your keyboards organized in terms of categories and different things. So I think there's a huge amount of discussion. We need to have, working groups in this area, so we're not starting from scratch. And I think the other thing is, again, for citizen science, and I know, Leo, I'm not going to be a spoiler here, but so you're going to talk about it later tomorrow. But again, how can the public document in a way that that it can be more standardized what's going on over time, and maybe we can give them lessons about how to work with their dog, so that one of the big initiatives we've had from the beginning of Interspecies is providing our animals with choice and control. And these systems, these interactive systems, allow them ultimately to have a voice, ask for things, but we need to make sure it's just not random. It may be random in the beginning. What tests do we do? How do we train? So it's very exciting right now.
So thank you, Diana. A couple notes from the chat. First, for your last point, a good example is Public Citizen was a citizen science project from the Barcelona Fab Lab. The same people who made that map I showed developed a sensor package that you could use to do environmental monitoring. And then what really made it take off is they created a platform to share the data from it, the infrastructure, and we'll talk more about that. A couple other things in the chat. Mark's noting open, just 2 comments on open. One is, I didn't mention, but there's a wonderful open source hardware alliance that's proselytizing, standardizing, coordinating the idea of open source for hardware. Open source has largely won for software. There's much less proprietary software development. The successful business models don't make the software proprietary, they build what you do on top of it. In the same way, open hardware is emerging as a practice with the same way, that the businesses don't keep the hardware proprietary, you make the business value from services you do on it. And there's a lot of experience on that. Then Ken is asking about GPS microchips and nanodust IC. There's beautiful work. My lab is involved in some in making the equivalent of dust IC you sprinkle. It's less relevant here because if you want it to work autonomously, what matters is the energy budget for where it sources energy and how it stores energy. There, you just need a larger aperture to receive and store enough energy. But there are a number of nice projects taking parasitic energy from the environment, measuring data and communicating it, either actively or under remote interrogation. The main thing that's rate limited to them, we keep coming back to in the session, is knowing they're out there, having a way to navigate them. And I think one of the big challenges for next year is mapping both the projects and mapping the enabling technology. Chemical sensing, let's see, Sandra's asking about chemical sensing for pets so you know if they're sick. There's been a long-standing tricorder X Prize on sort of the universal personal diagnostic. It hasn't been won, there isn't a single answer, but broadly what's emerging is spectroscopies. So rather than assay for a single thing, the sort of tools you use in a lab to do spectroscopy, and increasingly things like gene sequencing, you can make in little handheld forms that you can take in the field. Chaz, comment? We're almost out of time.
Yeah, I know you wanted to kind of separate these things into hardware, software, and everything.
They overlap, it's fine.
They sure do. And coming from this with like a fresh set of eyes, I come out of the makerspace movement, building 3D printers and matter control software and software development. And from fresh eyes, all you need is an open API. You need to track environment variables to inform context. Tim Berners-Lee is kind of pointing this way towards an open hardware approach with Solid and Interrupt.js already to enable client devices, front-end client devices, like you're speaking to this machine-based approach of networks, to inform each other on open protocols, this interoperability that you're talking about, and to inform each other in kind of like a dynamic context, and to have like a user, a front-end user. It can be a sapien, it could be a non-sapien, interacting with any such device, a front-end device, be it a QWERTY keyboard, to actual, and make these data sets open, and make, once the event occurs on the keyboard, whatever front-end device you have, the client device,
got it. So
this network. Right.
I'm going to interrupt just because we have seconds left. So given that comment, I want to end with this observation and challenge. So everything you just described is very tractable and can be done and needs to be done. I want to end with the challenge. In the beginning was Peter. Diana, Vint, and I all opt in to work with Peter, roughly. Then what's been wonderful is Mark opted in and has put a huge amount of time and effort in the archive. Will opted in and has put a huge amount of time in building the organizational infrastructure. And that, I want to really underscore that. It's easy to find sort of innovators. It's hard to find organizational innovators. And Will has done a fabulous job on that. Everything we just sketched in this last half hour is tractable, but they is you. And so the question now for the coming year is who's going to opt in? We're all doing what we just described. Who's going to opt in to help build this next tier in its development? So let me leave that as a hanging question as I hand off to Vint to pick up on software.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to listen to all the ideas that you've already uncovered, and also the hard work that you've done personally to help us along with all the others that you just mentioned. So this is, software is sort of a big term here. We're really talking about our ability to use computers in order to help us achieve our objective, which is to understand what kinds of communication non-human species use and whether or not we're capable of communicating with them. Just to give you some examples of the kinds of things that I think fall into the software category. There's a website called allaboutbirds.org, which has an application available called Merlin Bird ID. And it's about identifying birdsong, and they've done a fantastic job of cataloging all kinds of birdsong and then allowing you to use your mobile to detect the birdsong and identify which species it is that's producing that particular song. That's a good example of the power of computing and data to allow us to capture what we have learned and then apply it. So I just think about all the other things that we're learning how to do with computational resources. The most visible, of course, recently has been multi-layer neural networks and machine learning, which are extremely well adapted to taking enormous quantities of content and using them to train the machine learning systems in order to identify or categorize or catalog or translate or otherwise manipulate the multidimensional data that's been accumulated. And that goes to the question that Neil and others brought up in the previous session, which is what can we do, or can we capture useful information from the citizens who are using these various devices in a systematic way, so that that accumulated information can be used and analyzed by scientists like many of you who are trying to understand what we can derive from all of that information. Well, we have a little problem. One of them is, where do we put all the data? And of course, that's why it's important that Mark Graham is with us, because the Internet Archive is a place where a lot of data is being accumulated from the World Wide Web, among other sources. But figuring out how to expand that capacity is important. There's a related element here, and it has to do with the ability to use vast quantities of computational power that reside in cloud-based systems like the ones at Google and Amazon and Microsoft Azure, among others. That's a big opportunity in order to process a lot of the information that we're accumulating. Again, in the background, there's always a question of how does all that get paid for, business models for promoting the research and making progress in it. Are important. And I think we're not only looking at the philanthropic and the research agency support, for example, the National Science Foundation in the US, but other mechanisms for generating revenue that will pay for the cost of doing a lot of this work. So my primary interest in this discussion, I think, is looking for things that we can do first of all, in an affordable way, and then at scale, in order to capture the data, make sure that it's retained, that we understand the context in which the data was collected. For example, the whale song that Roger Payne has been working with. That's incredibly important data, which could have been lost if it weren't for the Interspecies Internet Award to help pay for the cost of digitizing that in order to preserve it and make it more useful. And so I'm looking, in this conversation, I guess I'm looking for people's ideas or problems that they wish they had solutions to. And one of the things that can forward our conversations is for people to raise problems that they haven't figured out how to solve, that perhaps collectively we can find solutions for. So I get very excited about what's beginning to happen, which is a coalition of people that are doing the research. The degree to which we're willing to share our results should accelerate our ability to interpret them. And I see that there's already a hand up, so I'm going to call on Khan Slobodchev in order to, I'm sure I didn't get that right, it's Slobodchikov, yes? So Khan, go ahead. Don't forget to unmute.
Here we are. Thanks, Vint. I want to bring up a sort of a related problem to what you're talking about. A lot of us have been looking at sound, as I have been in my own research, and we now have fairly good programs for analyzing sound, and it generates an enormous amount of data, but we can handle a lot of that. But my current interest is looking at visual signals, where you can perhaps look at what's happening to specific parts of an animal and associate that with context. And it seems to me that we really don't have, or at least I'm not aware of, software programs that will allow us to easily look at specific parts of an animal and how those parts change associated with context, and then generate the enormous amounts of data that we need for AI analysis. And I'm wondering if anybody has any insights into how to look at that, because visual signals are incredibly important in animals. And this is something that I, at least in my research, have not tackled because I don't have the resources to do that. So I wonder if other people have any insights in how we can go about doing this kind of analysis, given that we need enormous amounts of data and interpretation for AI analysis.
So it's very clear that image analysis is going to be part of this story. I see that there are many hands up already. Tarje, I think you're next.
Interject that.
Hi, should I go on? Yeah, so I have sort of two end member questions, and both are related to hardware-software combinations. So the one is basically on the citizen science scale. So I'm wondering, and I guess you have a Google affiliation as well, whether there's any scope to retrieve sort of mobile data on acoustic data and accelerometer data for these kinds of purposes, where one could think of citizen science where you tag certain, environments that you're browsing or something, and then sort of cooperate that centrally. I'm thinking really data, in the billions, basically. Because I think if that would be a repository that it can train neural networks, I think we'd be in a completely different ballgame to understanding sound, as it were, from the whole environment. And the other question relates to sort of bespoke hardware solutions where, you need to have a accelerometer, geophone, microphone in the field somewhere, and you actually want to have an onboard solution where you maybe have a discriminator for machine learning to discriminate, well, this is a certain type of sound, and then send that signal straight to some online repository to advance a warning, for example, in a sort of monitoring context. So basically, finding a centralized way where this could scale across all these different types of applications that we're looking at here.
So actually, this is an interesting problem space. One of my colleagues at Google is very interested in extremely large-scale scientific databases of diverse content and the ability to properly label all the information so you know what kind of information it is. Is it acoustic information? Is it image information? Is it something else? What are the units of measure that are associated with them? And once you get that into a common framework, not just a file, but a common framework, then like a spreadsheet, just for visual purposes, then you can make reference to the various data and do computations with it. And so he's extremely interested in that problem. So I will take that as advice to those of us who are trying to push this along to make some connections. I think Marcelo was reacting to what you were saying, so I thought I should call on him next. Marcelo?
Yes, sorry, in response to Con, I wanted to say, and I just put it on the chat, but I wanted to say there's a large community of people interested right now in detailed posture analysis of animals, okay, and using various AI-enhanced computer vision tools to do tracking in three-dimensional space of posture and various kinds of analysis. The best known of these projects is Deep LabCat, okay, which is now resides at University of Lausanne, if I recall correctly, and I think you should take a first look at that. They're able to do very detailed tracking. For instance, you can use it for anything from tracking of eye gaze direction, okay, to very nuanced posture tracking, okay?
Thank you. That's fascinating. And it always seems like every time you think you have a new idea, somebody's already halfway down the pike with it. So thank you, Marcelo, for that. Other comments or questions or ideas? Leo.
Hi. Yeah, so we've been focusing a lot on translation, which I think in the case of marine mammals and elephants might make, of course, a lot of sense. They seem to have a fairly developed repertoire, but a key feature of language that it really depends on kind of mutually motivated interlocutors. So it's not only that parents want to understand and talk to their children, it's also the case that children really want to understand and talk to their parents. And so one of the things that, the approach that we take is that how can we teach? It's not like we make a baby translator, right? We teach babies to kind of communicate, and then through a kind of dynamic co-creation of an interface that's where there's work happening on both ends, we kind of create this, there is this ability to communicate. So that's just that kind of aspect of the software where it's likely that it's not just that we're going to be developing software that can recognize the communication signals of an animal. It's also the case that we should recognize that the animal is hopefully is appropriately motivated to try and want to communicate with us, and they too are going to be modifying the kinds of signals they produce in order to accomplish whatever goals they might have.
So, it just occurs to me that taking your situation where it's humans communicating with pets, and expand that a little bit to humans communicating with animals that they're working with, or animals that are working with them. So example, sheep herding dogs, for instance, or horses that help you with cattle guiding and things like that. Is that a place that's already being explored as a research area? Because this cooperation and collaboration activity is actually well known and historically long undertaken. We've worked with animals for literally thousands of years, and so I wonder whether there is data to be gathered from that. And do you see what you're doing as having scope beyond the kind of human-pet relationship to a broader range of, let's say, achieving an objective of collaboration with non-human species?
Yeah, I mean, our mission from the very beginning has been to realize the potential of the animals we live with, and we're kind of deliberately ambiguous when we talk about realize, and we're deliberately ambiguous in terms of what we mean by animals we live with, right? And so, we have no hesitation when it comes to other species. It's just, it happens to be the case that if this is like a big data problem and a crowdsourcing problem and an economic problem, the fact that people are willing to spend money on dogs makes a big difference.
Well, this is like the pet hotels and pet hospitals and so on. Does the system that you've already built and are selling have a data capture capability that could be turned on, for example, at the agreement of the pet owner, so that we could begin to curate information that shows intent, for example, and ability to learn? Because as you point out, this is a two-way thing. And the discovery by an animal that it's possible to get a human to do something must be fairly important.
Totally. We have every intention of making it connected. In fact, we have a kind of ersatz way of connecting any button that we make, which is by kind of put DTMF codes in conjunction with the word that comes out that are then recognizable by any kind of listening device. So that's there. Yeah, but my background's in cognitive science. I have an undergrad degree in Cog Sci and AI. I went to the PhD program at UC San Diego for cognitive science. So ultimately, we don't even really think of ourselves as a so-called pet company. I think of ourselves as like a cognitive science or mind-oriented company. And we kind of end up being pigeonholed into the land of pet hotels and veterinary services, but we've never thought of ourselves that way particularly.
I hope I didn't insult you unintentionally.
Oh, hardly. Hardly.
Didn't mean to. But I am intrigued by the possibility of accumulating information in context, which we could then try to use some of our machine learning tools to at least parse and disaggregate. Let's see, I think Roger, well, I'm sorry, Diana's first, and then Roger, then Valerie. So Diana?
Oh, Roger, let's let Roger go first, because I've been talking a lot today.
Okay, Roger.
Thanks very much. I'm just thinking, religions have done the best job, it seems to me, of being able to attract the attention of millions of people, and they do so with information which I personally believe has very close to no value. And therefore, my thought is, I think we should somehow be looking at copying part of that model. And I think one of the absolute essences of that model is the fact that those who are the high priests of a series of religions don't take any advantage commercially or with funds directly. Of course, the church does, but the church, I think, is usually so corrupt that I'm not interested in that. But I'm looking at what their proof has been to me is that if you add money, you hugely shrink down what your effect is going to be. And I would just love us to try to think of things like praise, which I think is more valuable than any coin. I mean, look what people die for. It's concepts, it's not specific things.
So Roger's point is amplified by seeing what's happened in the World Wide Web. And that's a continued avalanche of shared information that people don't get paid for, but they get the satisfaction of knowing that it was useful to someone else. And I think Roger's point is very well taken. Actually, let me have Chaz had a question, and then I'll go to Diana and Valerie. So Chaz, you're up.
I'll keep it brief, but I just wanted to point to a recent article about Bunny, the dog, which had a nightmare. And Leo had an article in Salon, which was trying to meet this in context, right? What did Bunny mean by stranger danger, stranger shadow, or whatever she said when she woke up? And how, I'm curious how Clever Pet meets these instances from a research perspective. As I understand it, you guys collect data manually instead of an automatic API with your front end interfaces. And how do you make that a quality data set? How do you control for quality, and how do you meet these instances aside saying they're interesting?
So that sounds like Leo, that's a question for Leo to answer if Leo is available.
I wish Federico were here. So he's our collaborator at UC San Diego. We have controlling for quality is something that we'll be able to do probably a lot better when we have an actual automated way of collecting the data that's of which buttons are being pressed when and whatnot. At present, we have as the second phase of our study, chronic video recording. Obviously, we're not going to be doing that with the hundreds of people who are participating in the research that we're currently doing. That'll be a much smaller subset, probably somewhere between 10 and 50 households. We'll have recording setups with multiple cameras that are just on almost all the time, and we'll be capturing everything, ideally from the introduction of a button board, a soundboard.
And you can make that data open, right, on an open API, correct? So you can make that data accessible to other people on an archive, so we can see what Bunny did when on the timestamp with JSON objects just up and down stream, right?
We are expecting that. I mean, ultimately, the data belongs to the person who is
they would
participating.
elect to do it, right?
It doesn't belong to us, and so we will. People who are currently participating are already sharing the data, so they're manually logging everything that they're doing with the system. We have a lot of people who are educators, speech language pathologists, people who are dog trainers, people who are not particularly liable to too much confabulation in our experience. The group that we've had has been a very skeptical while still kind of optimistic group of participants. And so there is, some selection bias, no doubt, sample bias, but it's not the case that these dogs are putting out 400, 500 button presses per day that we're picking the most interesting 3. It's more along lines of, there's 10 to maybe 25 interactions per day. And a lot of them are prosaic. They're just like, oh, day-to-day, mundane, whatever things. And it's only a few that are, as fascinating as, say, a dog potentially, we don't know for sure, but potentially talking about what they were dreaming about.
Well, exactly. And it would be great for other researchers to have access to data like that and not just.
So it turns out that Bunny's mom is here, apparently. So if Bunny's mom is here, would you like to respond to some of this?
Oh, boy.
I don't know.
Alexis, are you into?
Yeah.
Let's see if she's, I wonder if she'll hop on. All right. Maybe
I am here. Hi.
Hi, Alexis. So how does this strike you?
Oh, I do not feel worthy of participating in this conversation in any sense of the word. I'm so nervous right now. I think, as Leo said, I've sort of considered myself a hopeful skeptic from the beginning. I have no business teaching my dog how to talk. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a speech language pathologist. My primary goal was just to see how how much of a connection, how deep of a connection we could have. And I was interested in exploring all methods of communication possible. So I've spent a lot of time trying to learn her intrinsic methods of communication. And on the day-to-day, I just sort of observe how she uses the buttons and try to presume competence and respond as though she does have some intent to communicate.
I think you put your finger on the word that comes to my mind, which is intent. And in all of the interactions I've ever had, the things that strike me most powerfully, like with Coco, is a clear indication of intent to get me to do something or to make an action happen. That's pretty fascinating. Well, you shouldn't, actually, you're a pioneer, whether you believe it or not. And so your experiences may inform a lot of us who are on this call about ways in which we can learn more. So thank you for sharing. We really appreciate that. I have two more hands up, Diana and then Valerie.
Yeah, so I just want to remind us all that, what's really challenging in working in this field of establishing communication with other animals, particularly when we get into these interactive systems, is that communication is a social process. And in many other kinds of experiments, when we're studying animal perception or sensory systems, we can divorce ourselves from those types of interactions and we can make sure that we're not influencing them. One of the challenges, again, is that when we want to develop communication, we're part of that system. And I think unless we want to do it in isolation, and then one might say, well, these animals will use this keyboard or this, this form, but they're doing it, they're just using a vending machine type of thing, which can be interesting in itself. So I think a lot of what we've heard today are people, saying, how do we capture the context? How do we capture the historical data so that if we get an event like a nightmare that somebody thinks is a nightmare, that we can analyze it in the context of the greater database. And that's why it's so important to collect these databases over time in context, including what we humans are doing with them. We are part of what we're sharing. That's called a transactional perspective. So I think that maybe having some more discussions about these kinds of things, it's transactional. And it's one of the things that became quite controversial in a lot of the past studies of communication systems with other animals. And I think, you can't get rid of that if we're looking at communication. We want to see how the owners are interacting, what patterns emerge, and then what gives us evidence that the animals, when do they get to that point where it's not just exploratory, which we expect to get. We've seen it with dolphins, we've seen it with apes, birds, but then it becomes much more, it seems to be more goal directed. How do we need that database. So I hope that helps.
Yes, it does, because what it bears an uncanny relationship to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which says when you make a measurement, you're disturbing the system. Yep. When you talk about quantum mechanics and quantum kinds of communication, you get exactly this problem. So your point about treating this as a whole system and not losing important parts of the state of the system is extremely relevant.
We are part of that system.
Yeah, exactly. Valerie's been waiting patiently. Valerie, what's your question?
No, don't worry. It's not a problem. Well, I was speaking a while ago with one of our many users, got in tune with Sandra Schlick, and we were talking about, machine learning and maybe translation, machines, as a linguist myself, as a translator and language coach. Sometimes, I use cat tools. I don't know if you ever heard of them.
No, what is that?
They are tools that helps us, to translate better, more systematically. But I don't like them actually because I'm pretty much old school. So we were wondering, me and Sandra, if there will be, some kind of machine learning tool, or technique that would allow us, to speak with other species, especially with house pets, like cats. I love cats, but other may love, dogs and all of that. Penguins also. I mean, what do you think about it? Like, do you think that penguins, other species, like domestic animals, we will be able to talk with them, recognize their signals, with a machine learning tool?
Well, remember that machine learning only works, at least the ones I'm familiar with a large number of samples in order to separate things into a high dimensional space. And so figuring out, we even have a problem figuring out what the samples are. The point earlier about what kinds of communication modalities are there, and there are many of them, whether it's sound or touch or chemical or visual. And so figuring out how to capture that data and then figuring out how to interpret it so that we can do the kind of machine learning analysis that can work well. You think about the GP3, I can't get the right acronym. Anyway, this large database with 10 to the 11th samples only works because of the scale of the information that's available. So that's one of the reasons that the ability to accumulate data from a large number of sources is so important. This effort, this interspecies internet effort, will succeed, in my view, only if we have a large enough collection of samples in situ and with sufficient state information so that we know how to interpret it. Yeah, thank you, Leo. GPT-3.
So this GPT-3 is the name for
it's a huge database of expression, of text expression. And because there's so much of it, you can ask it to complete the sentence. And so when you type something and then you let it respond with what you just said, and it will help you write a story, for example, just because it's gathered huge amounts of statistical information that there's a high probability that if you say, I don't know what, cotton candy, that there must be something going on. It's a party or it's a carousel or some other thing going on. So the data that was accumulated with so many samples lets the system write things that sound plausible, except it turns out often they're totally wrong because the sample set includes all kinds of false statements and everything else. They become part of the statistics.
But how that would apply to animals? I mean, for example, I have my male cat, his name is Tom, like Tom York from Radiohead. And for example, I want to communicate with him in as if it was a human, not as if it was a cat.
Yeah.
No, do you think that will be possible, in the next future?
Only if we've actually understood what level of cognition these animals have. We're almost out of time, and I have the possibly the real or fake Joseph Green has his hand up. So whichever Joseph Green it is, please go ahead and please identify yourself.
Well, this is Sue Savage Rumbaugh, and
hi, Sue.
I just wanted to use this brief opportunity to say that I've invited Fluid Pet to communicate with myself and others who are trying to develop an all-species keyboard. And I like everything that Fluid Pet has done, and I hope you will communicate, and I hope you will collaborate. I would just end quickly with all of the problems about context were encountered very rapidly with Lana. And Ernst von Glaserfeld, the linguist, designed a beautiful grammar that Lana learned and that was perfectly adequate for teaching Lana to respond very, very quickly to novel human communications, novel chimp communications. Lana could have been in or out of the cage. It really didn't matter. The entire system worked, but what was absent was the larger context. And the larger context is not only the visual context, but it's the whole history of the communication. Lana's communication with Tim was different than her communication with Gwen. Her communication with the computer was different. And so this is where dialogue comes in. So it's going to require a lot of analysis by Google, but with an app that were to be used around the world, not only would it generate non-human species funding, but it would generate the opportunity for humans to look very, very carefully at non-human behavior, and it would generate the opportunity for indigenous societies all over the world to begin to look at it. So I really am glad, very, very glad for everything the Interspecies Internet is doing, Vint, and I hope you will find a way to take that next step, and thank you for everything.
Well, thank you, Sue. We run out of time, but that's a beautiful way to end this part of our conversation. We're going to take a 15-minute break, and we will reconvene at 12:20 East Coast time in 13 minutes.
Hello, and welcome back. My name is Mark Graham, and this little section of the Curated Conversations is titled Internal. I've got a little presentation I want to run through, and then we'll open it up for conversation. So we're just a bunch of animals trying to communicate with each other, and we're working among a community of other animals trying to help each other in this process. And just want to run through some of the ways we're doing that, and maybe inspire some ideas about how we can get better at this process. First of all, it's already been mentioned, big shout out to Will for his leadership and his work day to day on all that has been going into helping to firm up and foster and support this community. The website, which initially Neil had created a website and his team, and then Will updated it here. And most everything that we've been talking about in terms of the resources are available from the website. If you go under Interspecies Communications and then go under Slack, there's a link there to join the Slack workspace. So last year, as I noted, we did launch this shared conversation space. It's both synchronous and asynchronous. So while we're all getting a lot of juice out of being together in real time today and tomorrow over the next year, before our next large gathering, but then month to month, and for our monthly conversations, we have this environment that we can share what we're doing. We can connect with other people. We can work together, we can collaborate, but most importantly, we can communicate. So there's more than 300 people in the space today. More than 3,500 messages have been shared. And we have a number of channels that are set up that are public, biomusic, ethical considerations, general discussion in the news, machine learning, etc., open educational resources. We can create new channels and new places to talk. Fundamentally, though, this is our space, and so it is what each of us want it to be, and will help. We launched a newsletter called The Call. I hope that everyone here in Zoom today has subscribed. If you haven't, please do. There's a link to it on the website. And tell other people about it. Share it. There's more than 1,000 people that currently subscribe to the newsletter. Excuse me, we've had 4 editions so far, 3 editions so far, and the 4th edition is going to come out very soon. And it'll, of course, have highlights for this workshop. We've got a pretty active social media effort going on. We're active on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and on Instagram. We should probably start up activities on TikTok and some other places. And this is helping us to get the word out and helping bring more people into our community. And that in turn is resulting in getting a fair amount of press. So lots of press. And in my experience, press kind of builds press. So in addition to the fact that people have been writing about the field writ large, not necessarily about, interspecies IO per se, but certainly, members of the community, we're also gathering all the information about the people, their publications, what are the things they've written. So we have a Google sheet, and we're beginning to use that to communicate back to people who write about us, letting them know about the work of other people in the field, and have like a virtuous feedback feedback that I think will result in having even more attention in the popular press. As noted, we've been hosting monthly conversations. This is a screenshot from the website, so you can go in. If you miss any of these conversations, you can find them there. You can view them. We also have a pretty active set of archives. These are being hosted at the Internet Archive. I should know, I didn't say this earlier, the Internet Archive is a nonprofit, and this is a complete volunteer effort on our part. We have a growing collection of books and papers, and also audio and visual materials. The books, if they're modern books, can be borrowed, like any library, one copy at a time, equal to the number of paper versions that we have. So you can borrow digital versions of paper books. If they're out of copyright, then you can, there's no limit to the access. So I encourage everyone to help contribute to the growth of our archives. Recently, we began putting together a bibliography of papers and books about the field of animal communications. This was seeded in part by the bibliography in Khan's book, Chasing Dr. Dolittle, some work that was put together by Earth Species, some work that I did, a fair amount of Googling, work on Google Scholar. So we brought together this shared data set. It has more than 600 items in it right now, and in part to help anyone who's coming into the field to kind of come up to speed and learn more about it. There's a number of things that we're going to be able to do with this this data set of resources. We can, for example, build link graphs, which is showing the relationships between one book and one paper and another. Oh, so a finding in this paper was based on some work that was done in a previous work. And if anyone doubts the power of the footnote, or the random connection, or two dots that haven't been connected. So indulge me in a super short story here. There was a story recently on NPR about something called the Timber Wars. And basically what happened was environmentalists were trying to figure out how to slow down or stop the clear cutting of old growth forests. And they were reading the literature, and they thought, oh, maybe we could do it based upon suing the government to protect an animal that may be endangered if we cut down all these forests. And there was a paper that noted the number of spotted owls required to maintain the healthy forest. And the number was 500 pairs of spotted owls. And if you did the math on then how many acres that would turn into, it actually wasn't a big number. So the researcher tracked down the footnote, because the footnote in the paper by the US Forest Service cited a conversation with a professor. The researcher called the professor and said, could you tell me more about this number of 500 for owls? And he said, what? I wasn't talking about owls. I was talking about fruit flies. And it was in a completely different context. And they did some work together, and they found out that the number was really closer to 50,000 spotted owl pairs were going to be required to maintain a healthy owl population. And that was the basis for the successful lawsuits in the United States that prevented clear cutting of old growth forests. So once again, the point of that little story was to demonstrate the power of following up on footnotes and connecting dots to help advance progress in the field. This is an example where Earth Species Project has data and methods, software, publicly available on GitHub, the image on the left-hand side here, and a resulting paper on the right-hand side. So if people want, people can read the paper, then if they want to go in and they want to check the methodology, they want to look at the underlying data, excuse me, all that's available to them. We also created this archive on the Internet Archive of material from Earth Species Project. Earth Species Project uploaded all this material. Anyone can go in and they can download any of these resources. Recently, we've uploaded a pretty large set of data, actually. bird songs. This is 70,000 files in total, something like 50 gig. Handling tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of files is a little challenging. We're getting better at it, but this is available now from the archives. And then finally, as noted earlier, in a few days, expect to get an email, or we'll share this also on the Slack workspace, of a survey to begin to collect other resources and information that we think might be helpful to advance our community, to advance our work. And in all things, what I'm really interested in thinking about is like where we were 2 years ago, and then last year, now, where might we be a year from now? What would we think right now? Oh, if we could wave a magic wand, it would be great if, you know, the following things were in place. There was a complete bibliography of all prior work in the space, right? That'd be a wonderful thing. If there were rich data sets of prior work that were available to support researchers. If there was a complete inventory of all of the people and the projects and the efforts underway around the world in the field that was easy to search using interfaces like what Neil showed, for example, that's wonderful. You know, how might that help the field? How can we help the field see individuals in the field, see themselves as part of a larger whole, be inspired by that vision, and be supported in a practical way as well in their individual work? So those are some of the brief ideas. I'd love to thank you, Neil. Go for it. Love to hear what you have to think.
Oh, no, that wasn't a question. That was just applauding all the work you're doing.
Oh, okay, great. Well, yay, back to you and everyone else here. So, but let me just open it up here. There we go. Oh, one more thing I want to say. An example was, I put the link for the Zotero system up. This is the bibliographic system. I put it up on our Slack workspace 2 days ago. And immediately, Serge sent me 8 PDFs of papers that he had, which are being added. And then Chaz reached out to me and said, I've got tons of papers that I can add to this as well. And then I said, hey, Chaz, would you be up for maybe taking a lead on helping to carry this project forward? And he said, yes. So that's another example of how it works.
Well, the thing is that like I came into this, right, like with fresh eyes, like I said, and I need to wrap my head around all this data, and what better way to do it than to collect all the best, you know, data sets and to be able to use them. And so Zotero is this awesome platform that you're allowing us to use. We could just upload our PDFs, and you guys can send them to me if you'd like. I think Arik already sent, I think it was Arik who sent 8 PDFs, and Serge sent some too. I've already uploaded one, and I made an account on Zotero. Anyone can make an account on Zotero and just join the group, really. And it's as easy as if you want to, I have a script that you can push up your PDFs, and it's going to check like some duplicates to make sure there's no duplicates, stuff like that. But other than that, it's a great effort and so needed just to wrap your head around what's going on, and hardware and software. And because I'm coming into this space needing this, right? And to have a link tree like a Wikipedia, perfect. And Wikipedia is always incomplete, right? You got to keep that up to date. So this too. So thank you.
Sweet, sweet. Vince.
You know, it just occurs to me, this is partly a question either for you or Chaz. Archive.org has become quite famous as the place where physics papers are accumulated. Is it the case that Zotero is sufficiently rich in functionality that it could be like or even better than archive.org? And should we be encouraging everyone who is doing research and publishing to provide copies of preprints or in PDFs and just grow this collection so that we can not only reference it, index it, and possibly even use machine learning tools to identify papers that are relevant to what we're interested in?
It's a great question. I think it's a yes and kind of thing. I mean, there's Google Scholar, A few months ago, the Internet Archive launched scholar.archive.org. We now have more than 30 million completely open access papers accessible. I started working with Zotero because it was accessible and relatively easy, also fairly nimble. So it's clearly a subset of some of these larger sets. Sometimes I think it's easier to work with tools that you can kind of, interface with yourself a little more freely. So this is a bit of an experiment at this point. Definitely, if you type in terms like animal communications or interspecies communications in Google Scholar, you get a lot of things. Some of it may be kind of noisy. What I look forward to, if I could make my vision a year from now, for example, would be not just like 1,000 or 2,000 papers, right? But annotation about them, summaries about them, classifications, categorizations about them, ways to make it much more easier for a new person, like me, for example. I'm not a domain expert in species communication. I want to learn, and so to make the on-ramp as easy as possible.
Go ahead. There's a question that's in the chat from Joy saying, how does this differ from the ResearchGate?
A ResearchGate is a fine tool as well. Once again, I could probably list a dozen places for the collection of scholarly material. Some of these systems, ResearchGate and others, have limitations from perspective. I'm not going to get into any of the details about them right now. I'm proposing certainly everything that I'm going to be helping to facilitate here is going to be completely free and completely open. But I'll be mining ResearchGate also. Once again, it's trying to take the whole sea of information and maybe boil it down a little bit, add in some metadata, add in additional tools, and make it more accessible and useful to people.
Question about, in addition to archives of text documentation and the like and imagery, what about databases of data that's been accumulated, like the Roger Payne's material? Where should that end up, or where is it ending up?
I see Roger's hand up, but I'm going to note, GitHub is kind of the main place that people doing software development share their software and share data as well. So, in all things, I think people should use the tools they're most comfortable with. And for many people on the data side, that's going to be GitHub. We're also mirroring, Internet Archive has a partnership with GitHub where we archive much of GitHub also. So, long term, we're really just trying to ensure this material is going to be available.
There's some discussion in the chat, Mark, about copyright and things like that, which is a true bugaboo for many of these things.
Without question. What I've been talking about so far, the 30 million documents available from scholar.archive.org, these are all open. So they've been made open by the journals or the publishers. The material books, some of the books available in our archive, as I noted, are available because we're a library through controlled digital lending, one copy at a time. I'm not encouraging people to share copyrighted materials willy-nilly. And yeah, that should be clear. But there's also something to be said for, I'm going to encourage people to read the Wired article, How a 60-Year-Old Scientific Screw-Up Helped COVID Kill, which goes back to a 1955 book that was published by Harvard University Press that is still in copyright. And it turns out at least one of the publishers, which was the Commonwealth Fund, when I wrote to them 2 days ago, said they never intended it to be restricted and they wanted it to be publicly accessible. So there's a lot of work that can be done to take material that we think might be protected by copyright and check out and see if in fact it can be made publicly available. If anyone wants to follow up on that specifically, I'd be happy to help.
Tomas asked a very important question, how to share and bridge the knowledge with people who don't use the internet. I'm shocked that there are people who don't use the internet. In fact, I know there are 4 billion of them that we want to get hooked up, but do we have any ideas there?
So others might have ideas. I've got a couple. I mean, one is popular press is a way to get the word out, radio. the printed material. There's still newspapers being published, magazines, etc. So people are still using paper a lot. And, you know, books. I got a whole bunch of books about interspecies communication on my bookshelf now. Word of mouth, but, you know, radio definitely is a medium that we can leverage more.
Joy Rittenberg said, Riedenberg, well, I hope I'm getting it right, said something very important, interlibrary loan. I can tell you that my wife, who has half of Fairfax County Library in our room right now, has become very facile at interlibrary loan requests. And apparently the libraries are extraordinarily willing to help you get access to content.
It's kind of amazing. I've got 2 books are waiting for me at the Burlingame Public Library through interlibrary loan as we speak. So it's like the day before Christmas. All right, I'm putting the link in here for the Zotero system. And I encourage, if anyone wants to join the Slack, go to the Interspecies IO website. And there's a link there to join the conversation. I am mark@archive.org, and I will leave it at that.
Mark, hi, just wanted to pipe in here. So if any of our community has done podcasts and we can post it, should we send them to you?
Absolutely. We pretty much archive all the podcasts in the world at this point, but we don't make them publicly available because at this time, but definitely if we get permission from the people making them, we will make them available. So I would certainly encourage that. Thank you. And I see Roger's hand back up, but muted.
I quickly return to my point. I think a lot of people don't realize, in terms of a world now with people who have made $1 billion or more, how large a number $1 billion actually is. If you paid, how many people could you hire at $100,000 per year? And the answer is 10,000 people. And if you did this for people who are studying individual species and you spread them around the world, you could be monitoring the comings and goings of 10,000 different species. Just for a starter, none of us can name 10,000 different species. So my feeling is, I would just love to suggest that that is a path to the future for some very open-minded and far-seeing person with a great deal of money that could, in fact, save life on Earth.
Good point, indeed. I know we've gone over time in this session, so I'm happy to turn it over. I think next up is Peter about external communications. Peter Gabriel.
Hi there.
Hey there.
Yeah, it's firstly, big thank you to Mark. I think what Mark has added to this is enormous. And I just actually, while I'm in the thank you mode, Will has also done a fantastic job. And this was an idea that was thrown around a bit, and as Sue and Penny know, that for a while, but once Neil took it seriously, and then Diana and Vint, and then Jeremy came on board, things gathered a gravitational mass. And I think, seeing this community growing is enormously exciting. And there is some power in this collective connection, because one, it gives us sort of credibility. I know many of you of the great pioneers that we have on board with us today have had trouble, amongst your academic peers and in different situations and levels of support. And hopefully, putting these connections in place will allow the external environment to change, to be a bit more welcoming and supportive. And it was also wonderful to see Alexis on board, because what she has decided to do with Bunny is going to inspire, has already inspired, many, many people to take this field seriously and explore things with their well-loved pets. I think there's so many ideas that I've come across today and I've learned. It's been very inspiring session, but I'm going to riff a little bit because I was interested in one of the things Leo was saying about babies and trying to guess what he's up to with that. And I know with a couple of my own kids, you know, we explored the signing thing that was quite popular, which did seem to accelerate development of language. And I know one of the, Neil was asking us to consider Christy Johnson's work with non-verbal people, which she wasn't ready to do at this point, but hopefully she will in the future, because there may be a ton of stuff that we will hopefully learn that could be applied there and be of use to communicating with non-verbal people. So I think it's really exciting and transformative, the possibilities of pushing this out in the world and getting lots more people, hopefully a lot of young people involved with the citizen science. So may there be many more bunnies. I think Mark has covered quite a lot of the areas, so I'm just going to touch on a couple of things and then get out of the way. But clearly social media is the way a lot of people are introduced to a lot of things. So we need to work on that. I think in terms of education, you know, already there are some great research projects connected with universities, but it'd be great to see some courses developed in this field that could, flourish in universities and maybe in schools. So I think there are many different ways we can explore to get this out there. And the way we display the data, I think some of Neil's comments too about mapping and displaying the data are really important, because I think, well, I know for myself, once I have the visual version, I find it much easier to understand and really get what's going on. You know, the work of Hans Rosling animating statistics was very inspiring. And I think we're about to move into an age where you don't just know your data and gather it, but you go into these physical simulations of environments where you experience the data. And if we can create that not only for understanding the data, but also maybe helping us respond better and be more aware of ways we might interpret the experience of the communication, that could be exciting and helpful. And then I wanted to pick up something that Tomas had highlighted, which I was hoping to mention. Black Elk Speaks was a book that impressed me enormously when I was a teenager. And I think that his point about what indigenous peoples have known, I think they may find in many parts of the world, the idea of interspecies communication as a new concept laughable. You know, I think maybe a bit like our sense of smell, there might have been something that we now have less of, that indigenous peoples haven't lost. And in the way, I know in the Black Elk Speaks book, the relationship with the natural world and what we have done with it was something that I found so deeply worrying and depressing. And the sense that, as Tomas so rightly pointed out, that there are pockets of knowledge in traditional cultures all around the world that we would be absolutely crazy to ignore and not to try and bring into this is really important. So I think those are the main points I wanted to make. And now perhaps I get out the way and let anyone who wants to throw some ideas in how we may make this a little more effective or powerful or push it out into the world, please take over. Any comments, problems, ideas? I know it's been a long day, so everyone's probably getting a little weary at this point, but if you can push out a few thoughts, that would be much appreciated.
Penny has a hand up.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't see that.
Yeah, hi, I'm with Penny here. This is Gary.
Okay, great. Penny, yeah, please.
But I have a question first.
Sure.
Speaking of pockets of knowledge, we've accumulated a lot of data. Penny has, I should say, over 45 years, and we're preparing it for analysis in the database, but it's not enough. It only involves a few gorillas. There's a huge population of gorillas, not gorillas, great apes, from which we could collect data if we had the cooperation of zoos.
Yeah.
I throw it open to everybody. When you think of a way to incentivize zoos to cooperate in this effort. Now, they've been afraid of things like human languages, human sign languages, but I think they'd be less afraid of natural languages, their own intrinsic languages. And if we can begin to use AI to interpret it, that might open the door, the floodgates.
Yeah, gestural languages are common. I mean, all the great apes, like us, gesture to communicate. And gorillas in particular have, in free-living gorillas and zoo gorillas, 100 different gestures that they use to communicate without any teaching, exposure to humans, etc.
So we have a real leg up with great apes. We should take advantage of that leverage.
Yeah, sorry, please.
I'm sorry. I was going to just pop in because I've worked a lot with animals in zoos. And I think that, I could see proposing, perhaps even through Interspecies Internet, some collective approach where we talk about the value to zoos and as well as to the animals. Zoos' mission is to engage people, to inspire them, to protect these animals in their environment. And the more we can learn across populations, across different social groups, and see how it varies from group to group, that would certainly help. I mean, I could see that being a really good proposal. We know people at AZA. I'd be happy to work with you on pitching some ideas.
That'd be great.
And if anybody else is well connected, let me know. Contact me, and I'm really happy to work in that initiative.
Fantastic. Thank
Great
you.
idea.
Great.
And in sanctuaries, by the way.
Yes.
With sanctuaries, Peter, Peter is very well connected with a sanctuary, a primate sanctuary as well. So we can pull some ideas together.
Oh yeah, exactly. And I have an off-the-wall question. Does anybody know where you would report animal behavior that has been predictive of earthquakes?
Huh.
I
Mark,
think
maybe.
I think there are people at Stanford in the United States working on looking at snake responses. I seem to remember that when I was living out in California. You might just be able to Google it, but I know there was a group working at just observing the behavior of snakes and then looking at changes prior to quakes, but I don't know.
Well, yeah, my experience is just at the foundation, the spiders, they were like, kill me. They were out, big spiders on the porch, giant net web. This is a few days before a tree tarantula was sitting out by the sink where you would touch the knob to operate the sink. And also 3 weeks before, I believe, I was swimming every day. And those little what do you call them? I call them pill bugs, were killing themselves in mass droves into the pool.
Just before
it was 2 or 3 weeks before the earthquake. I went, what is going on? But I don't know if other people have noticed things like that that could be predictive even sometime in advance.
Yeah, the ant story earlier on was also fascinating. So it sounds like there's definitely, I think there's a lot for non-humans to teach us and indigenous peoples to teach us. So maybe that we can have sort of sections within our workspace group specifically focused on those.
I think Tarje has a comment on the earthquake to feed back on that.
I have a comment also.
Tarje, do you want to say?
Please.
Yeah.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, Peter, I think this is amazing. Your remark on First Nation people, indigenous people. And I would just want to mention a small, because are not only them. In the book of Incend Express I just sent into the chat is a beautiful story about zookeepers inside zoo that for many years during the 70s and 80s and even earlier, they were acknowledging that penguins we're having like a two males relationship, and all the directors of the zookeeper, they will say, oh, this drunk zookeeper, they don't understand nothing about biology. They don't understand what is the male penguin and what is the female penguin. And actually, after the years, we understood that, two males could have a relationship. And we mistreat all the knowledge of the zookeepers, thinking that they don't understand nothing about science and biology. And it's not only about, sometimes it's like the niche of science are so, like strict that somehow also, I hope so that art also can push that boundaries, and observation can be done by not only indigenous, but many, many, many people around the world.
Great. Well, maybe we can get these subsections, and zookeepers would have their own group within our project.
Perfect. Tarek, do you want to make your comment?
Yeah, sure. Just maybe briefly from the seismological perspective. So I think part of the problem with that was the experiments that the Chinese did with dogs in the 1970s, which completely failed. And I think that kind of shut that idea of research out, which I find a real pity. And I think that the big problem is a sort of a disciplinary communication barrier between zoologists and earth scientists. So I think there is a lot of scope actually for exploring these research ideas, but the funding just falls through all the cracks because no one believes that there is any tangible data. So I'm one who would really be behind pushing these directions, but I think the studies are rare and in between because no one dares to publish in that direction. It's a real pity because I think there's a lot of scope, and I'm familiar with some colleagues who work in that direction, but they're having a really hard time in pushing that through.
When you say no one dares, I think that's very important because this should be the forum which allows wild and crazy ideas to be taken seriously. And
absolutely agree.
If our community, by virtue of its associations and its number, can give all these so-called crazy ideas some credibility, then we will have done something useful.
I think it'd be fantastic. Yeah.
Perfect. Sue, you had a question? Sue, did you have a question? You're on mute, Sue. Sue, you're on mute.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that everything I've heard is so on target and so wonderful. And I can remember when YouTube first came online and there were not a lot of interspecies videos and animals were not doing as much as they're doing now. I've sometimes even wondered if some of the videos that I put on about Kanzi might have encouraged some interspecies interaction. But it's kind of a new consciousness that's coming about. Maybe it's because you started it, Peter, I don't know. But many people are afraid to be scientists on YouTube, are afraid to take YouTube seriously, but wonderful things are being seen there, which suggests that it's time now to set up an app to let people around the world show interspecies communication, whether it's between humans and non-humans or between multiple non-humans. When I was in the Congo, I saw a lot of species communicating with the bonobos. And Lingomo, who's working with me, has found that the parrots there are communicating with the humans and with the bonobos. There has to be so much more. But I don't see why this app couldn't also include some education so that it's not just, anecdotal, that 600,000 anecdotes make data, and Mark can help that happen. And if people have some scientific training, even a bit, in how to do this observation, the quality of it can go up really fast. And if that's happening, there have to be big companies that are going to want to fund it. You only have to put a few ads on, and you will have the ability to do this. So that's just a suggestion. Maybe I'm all wrong, but it just seems right at your doorstep.
I love that idea. I think it's fantastic, and it could be something which in itself grows. But I can see there's a few hands. Kelly, maybe you'd like to speak next.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to go back to this idea of working with zoos. Now, I work at a marine mammal facility called the Dolphin Research Center, and I have recently been part of a group that we're calling the Marine Mammal Research Network, whose idea, it's made up of some professors, some people from facilities, some research trainers, et cetera, to try to build connections between researchers and facilities. And I don't know whether or not there's something similar in zoos, but I'll tell you that some of the things that we're trying to work on is, number one, being a matchmaking service between professors or graduate students usually, and zoos, and also giving marine mammal facilities some resources that they might use. And so like I said, I imagine that there is, or certainly could be, something in zoos that would allow that as well. And I also wanted to echo the point, there has often been some animosity sometimes between scientists and the trainers or the caregivers at facilities. And we need to make sure that that doesn't happen, because the people that are working with those animals know those animals the best, and they're a big source of help. And just for anybody who does want to do any work with marine mammals, I also wanted to point out there is a conference, the Society for Marine Mammalogy, in December, and there is a pre-conference workshop that I'm part of where we're specifically talking to researchers that work with wild animals and trying to give them the idea that working with animals up close and personal can actually help them in the kind of stuff that they're doing as well. That's on the
Ellie, thank you. Could you put that link on? Could you send us that link?
Yep.
As well, that would be great. And also the idea of putting some of the trainers that are working with us on publications. Many of us have done that. And I think that is something where, if you're in the field working with people and they're helping you and working with people in zoos and putting them on, it really is very reinforcing for them and really helps with future work. Thank you for all those ideas and suggestions.
Great. And John, you're up next.
Thank you. Thanks, guys, so much for organizing this today. Real quick, I just wanted to build on Penny's thoughts for anyone else interested in her thread. Good to see you again, Penny. For those who don't know, I'm John from Companion. We've just real quick, we've raised about 10 million to go build this consumer product that's able to autonomously interact with a dog. We're really interested in Penny's thread. So we're doing work both on actually training different commands that humans find valuable as a way to kind of scale up our team and be able to do more R&D and understanding about animals. But second, we've actually spent quite a bit more time recently over the last 6 to 9 months understanding postures, positions, meta-level behaviors that dogs already do, specifically to benefit on the health and wellness side. So like working with the big pharma companies on helping identify symptoms of pain associated with osteoarthritis and things like that, like subtle things that you can pick up on if you observe posture, movement, the things that animals already communicate. Anyway, so thank you guys again for putting this on. Wanted to voice support for that thrust of Penny's thought on observing the communication, the postures that animals are already emitting. We're doing that with dogs. Happy to chat in case it's interesting to anyone in the group.
Brilliant. Okay, and I think Patricia is next. Hello, Patricia. Oh, I think you're on mute. Okay, great.
Just unmuted. Okay, so the National Science Foundation actually has funded a STEM art sci project that is biomusic fundamentally based, that helps children actually learn how to listen to their environment and to put terms to it and help them structure sound. And it includes lessons primarily directed at the elementary level, but can certainly be expanded to the middle and upper class levels as well. Our experience with that curriculum, which is pretty deep, it includes lessons that enable people who are music teachers to work with people who are doing biology teaching in the schools. But our experience with that is that that particular curriculum and this type of experience for children actually works better out of school. And so if you have opportunities to encourage and enable summer camps, out of school learning, I'll post that open access link to that curriculum so that you have access to something to begin with, so that children actually start to hear and listen critically to what's going on around them by using their innate musical brains. And I would also say that on the university level, I continue to work with a lot of very eager students who are majoring in music. These are people who are already very well acclimated to listening critically, and they are, by their nature, empathetic to the environment. And so I would really encourage embracing the music majors over in your various academic settings to bring them into the animal communication world. And they start at a much higher level than your typical undergraduate. So I just wanted to say that. Oh, and one other thing, we're in the process of commercializing an online learning format for students that be elementary as well. But we're going to actually do a lot of citizen science through that, where the children would be recording and then uploading into a space where they would be creative with the sounds as well.
Fantastic. Great. Veronica, I would think your hand is up next.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add something about the idea to be working more in zoos, which I think is really great. From my experience, I've worked with a lot of zoos studying elephant communication. And here looking at interspecies communication is interesting because lots of the elephants communicate with their favorite handler. So they are actually trying to communicate using elephant signals, but in the same context they would do with the conspecifics, but applying them to the human conspecifics or human bond partners. So I think it's an interesting idea, and I have contacts to the zoos like in my research area that is Central Europe. I know which ones are happy to cooperate. So I think if we would maybe like make a group on Slack or something where all the people that have good connections to zoos and know which one would be interested, that we can coordinate this. And yeah, thanks again, everyone, for that meeting.
Great. I'm not sure there are any other hands, any other questions, contributions anyone wants to throw in. I think we're coming to the end, but please feel free to give us some nice pale bits.
I'm sorry. Also, could I just ask Veronica to follow up on that and make a Slack channel if you need help with check mark? Okay, I just want to make sure that didn't slip through the cracks. Thank you, Veronica. Sorry.
Yeah, I could not, I don't know how to put the hands on, but I work with Stavros Katsaneva from Gravitational Wave Detector, and he worked with Wanda Merced Diaz, a blind astronomer. And we are trying now to use haptic astronomer to detect gravitational waves. And this means also people who have very different abilities are amazing to detect things. And, Wanda have been able to detect things that no people with vision were able to see. Like spiders many times are blind and perceive the world through vibration very differently. And now we're trying to move through a haptic astronomer. And just to keep including from the indigenous people, from the zookeeper, and then to people who have different abilities and humans also.
Fantastic. Unless there's anyone else, I think we're wrapping up here. Any other final contributions? I just think, yeah, it's been an amazing day, and I've learned so much, been so much to inspire us. And every time it really feels like this group is solidifying and making connections and moving this whole project forward. You know, once again, we've got some of the amazing pioneers who really started this thing and inspired the rest of us. So perhaps it's the right time to end with a big thank you for taking the first step and for inspiring all of us. Thank you.
Well, Peter, it's Vince. Theoretically, the schedule.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I haven't got the schedule.
Doing a wrap up, which you apparently just did.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry.
No,
this is what happens. Yeah,
it may be perfectly okay, as you say. It's been many.
In my studio, there's sort of idiot proof, and then there's Gabriel proof. But clearly, yeah, I test the system once again.
Well, what I suggest, I don't need another 40 minutes, clearly, but I thought it might be useful just briefly to touch on some of the points that I thought were well made today. One of them, almost at the beginning, had to do with ethical concerns and considerations for this kind of research. And I think it's very important for the interspecies internet community to articulate those ethical concerns and to make sure that we all adopt a kind of common posture with regard to that. The second thing, which I think was very important, is that we still have in mind to recognize people for their work in this space, and including some of the non-human species who are integral to the research, and without which or without whom the research wouldn't progress at all. Another thing which I felt was strongly emphasized today was making sure we can preserve the data that's being collected, but also to alert the researchers about the scope of the data that's needed. I mean, the metadata, the conditions under which data was collected, the context in which it was collected is extremely important. Finding ways to represent that context is still very much a challenge. So that, especially representing it in a way that we can then digitalize it and then use our computer programs to essentially analyze it. So there's some serious thinking that still needs to be done. Mark's comments about the Internet Archive and Slack and the Interspecies IO website are extremely well taken. It's a place where we can discover each other and learn to collaborate. So I have a list of action items which I will offer to you in a few minutes. There's something that caught my eye when we were talking about the cetacean communications, and I thought about the term CETI pronounced Seti, which reminded me of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence spelled SETI, and it occurred to me that might have been deliberate. In any case, it's delicious. Something else caught my eye during that discussion, and that was the diversity of the researchers that are participating in that effort. And in particular, Shafi Goldwasser, who is a Turing Award winner, which is at the Nobel Prize of Computer Science, is a cryptographer. And so there's something absolutely wonderful about the fact that she's interested in this. There was an observation that sperm whales are social creatures. And I think, again, this whole notion of understanding species as in a social context is important, particularly because a lot of the non-human species interactions occur in a kind of social context. So we need to keep that in mind. Let's see. I'm not going to try to summarize everything here. My attention was drawn to the Earth Species website, which is another place which we should be paying attention to because of the remarkable source material that's available there. There was a comment about interspacing of the sperm whale clicks. And it occurred to me as an engineer that that's the moral equivalent of what's called pulse code modulation, where the intervals between the signals carry the information. And so it would be quite remarkable to discover that the sperm whales were using a similar method for communicating with each other. It occurred to me that as we listened to a lot of the discussions about research that was going on, that the modalities of communication turn out to be richer than I had appreciated. It's not just the 5 senses, because some of these species have senses that are well beyond ours, whether it's in the infrared or ultraviolet, or it's magnetic sensing, or other kinds of ability to detect signals. And so we need to actually be sure that we have recognized the full range of communication modalities that non-human species are capable of using. Let's see, just looking through a lot of my notes here. One of the things that I remember asking for a reprise on the honey guides and the honey hunters, and what do the birds get out of this? And the answer was beeswax. And this is a fascinating concept of cooperation across species in order to achieve a common objective, or different objectives, but which are mutually self-reinforcing. So I hope that we can uncover more places where these kinds of cooperative enterprises occur. I made a note that we want to increase the catalog of cooperative activity among species, so that, and Mauricio looked like he was a very good source of that information. So we should try to capture that somewhere in the GitLab website. That someone else mentioned that spiders apparently can play with the web that they've spun in order to attract different possible prey. That I found pretty fascinating. Reminded me of, come into my parlor, said the spider to the fly. And apparently that's not just a children's theme. Okay. A lot was said about sustainable financial models in order to continue to promote the research that's going on. I want to encourage everyone to give some serious thought to that, because as Neil pointed out, there may be several different ways of combining activity that will result in a sustainable model for keeping the research going. It's not just philanthropy, and it's not just going to government research agencies. Leo is very good about summarizing some of the things that he's doing that produce that kind of support. And Diana and others have repeatedly pointed out that it's important, when we see these kind of citizen engagements, to help them help us by being able to accumulate the experiences that they are having with their animals in a way that's supportive of research. Okay, so I would summarize this in terms of actions that you can take. First of all, please go to interspecies.io and become a part of that community. Join the Slack groups or start new ones that seem to be useful. Subscribe to the call newsletter. Help us plan next year's symposium. Please use both the online tools and these meetings today to make connections with like-minded researchers. I hope some of you have discovered people doing work that's relevant to what you're doing that you didn't know about. That would be a very important positive outcome of spending these hours together. Certainly keep us at the Interspecies IO team together, aware of what you're doing and your work. And please join us tomorrow, if you like, for the public event that starts again at 9 o'clock East Coast time. So I think I will wrap up there. I don't know if any of the other members of the steering committee would like to say anything further, but I'll add my thanks to everyone who helped make this possible. I took a lot of notes.
Thanks, Vin, for such a great sum up. I just love to thank everyone for joining us and for our team that made this possible. Thanks all, and hopefully we'll see you again tomorrow or at our next meeting or before that.
So bye-bye, everybody.